Comedy Central has been around as a cable channel for quite some time. In fact, it launched on April 1st, 1991. And if you had to pick any date to launch your comedy network, that's a pretty good date. Sure, there is a bit more history that leads to that moment going back a couple years to 1989, but that's not really important nor the main subject of the video. Now, Comedy Central is known for a lot more than just its animated offerings, but today, I strictly wanted to focus on those animated offerings as some of them were pretty significant for me as I experienced them growing up, and they are honestly the biggest reason for me really tuning into Comedy Central back then. Today, I wanted to take a look at the shows I know all too well, and then shows I don't to really get a good look at the broader history of animation on Comedy Central. Going back through some of these shows really reassured me why I would keep coming back to watch more, and some, well, they made me question why I even did. There's a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the animated selection of shows here, but we're gonna take this journey together. There probably was a good segue to draw them together there, but we aren't starting with that show. We are in fact going in order, starting with Comedy Central's first ever animated series up to their most recent. So let's start things off and take a look at...
That just makes me a little uncomfortable.
Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist was the first animated series produced for Comedy Central, created by Jonathan Katz and Tom Snyder, and it follows this fictionalized version of Jonathan Katz as a professional therapist, so the title checks out. The show would mainly have you focus on how he deals with his patients during work, and what advice or anything really that he has to offer that can help them with what they're going through. On the surface, that doesn't really sound like the most interesting show out there, but surprisingly, Dr. Katz is a really fun show, thanks to the dialogue exchanges between all of the characters. Honestly, the whole show is made in a very unique way that helps it really stand out and become a really strong swing from Comedy Central for their first animated series. The series creates its dialogue exchanges through retroscripting, which is basically creating a base outline of a script of where a conversation or the plot needs to head in, but letting the dialogue between the characters be improvised to an extent to create a more natural and often relatable feeling to it all. Some shows that I spoke about in my recent animated MTV series video had some aspects of this, or were more so just leaving in mistakes and animating to them for the fun of it, but the best example to give for this is the series Curb Your Enthusiasm, as Larry David crafted one of the funniest shows with some of the most natural improv and dialogue out there. This really helped Dr. Katz come off so realistic in tone when the characters were speaking to one another. The other main aspect here that made the show special was the use of squiggle vision, which is where Tom Snyder really comes in, as he invented this specific animation style. Squiggle vision was a form of computer animation that could emulate crudely hand-drawn animation, making any animate object like the characters themselves have this shaky and non-stop movement look to them. So more static and inanimate objects would be contrasted to this by not having that effect, helping the squiggle vision stand out so well. This style would be seen again in several other productions, like one of Tom's next projects, Adult Swim's Home Movies, where the first season was made with squiggle vision before changing the series to be made in Flash. Now, this style of animation is not to be confused with the animated style of boiling lines, which you may remember from the distinct look of Ed, Edd n Eddy, which Danny Antonucci implemented to give this extra bit of movement and life to the characters, while the backgrounds and other objects stayed stagnant. I love when animators do something different or conventionally weird that ends up making something way more memorable for it. While the show has a main focus on Dr. Katz having therapy sessions with his patients, we do get to see his personal life play out in between all of this, where we see him having to deal with his son Ben, a mid-20s, not really going anywhere in life yet dude who basically throws darts at a dartboard metaphorically for whatever interest he has at the moment. This leads to some fun dialogue back and forth between him and his father, splitting the show between a lot of what the plots or bits turn into and the therapy sessions themselves. Ben is voiced by John Benjamin, who, if you've been watching animated shows in general over the last 20-some years, you've heard his voice, most famously from his roles as Sterling Archer in Archer and Bob in Bob's Burgers. There are also some good moments with Dr. Katz's secretary Laura, who makes you question how she's still employed here. She's played by Laura Silverman, who, yes, is in fact Sarah Silverman's older sister, and other than that, the show will put some focus on what Dr. Katz gets up to outside of work and dealing with his kid, where he ends up hanging out at a bar to which he is friends with the bartender Julie, as well as his friend Stanley hanging out there as well. At its core, it's a pretty simple and static show that doesn't really go outside of this formula, but it's what's in the formula itself that works so well to make the show pretty enjoyable.
Doctor, I seem caring, don't I?
Would you like some chocolates? Come on, take a chocolate.
One of the show's strong suits was that it was able to gather a solid list of comedian cameo voice appearances from this era, who either had some notoriety or would soon get some more, such as Jon Stewart, Bob Odenkirk, Jeff Ross, Rodney Dangerfield, Ray Romano, Dave Chappelle, Ben Stiller, Fred Stoller, and the list goes on and on and on, as they would all play themselves getting therapy from Dr. Katz, allowing us to get a taste of their comedy thrown into how the show works with it. A good amount of these cameos would end up being reoccurring too, giving us moments to revisit these characters and see how they continue forward after each time they see Dr. Katz. I implore you to take a look at the list of cameos in this show, and it might just surprise you to see who was on this show. Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist, ended up running for a total of 6 seasons with 81 episodes, so not a bad run at all. The comedy bits back and forth between the comedians through their therapy sessions really makes the show something worth watching. The final season had an annoying release schedule, where after the first 6 episodes premiered in mid-1999, the next 9 wouldn't premiere until they all dropped the same year, the day before Christmas, during a special marathon, with the final 3 episodes not premiering until years later in February of 2002 for whatever reason. This was dubbed as Dr. Katz Goes to the Final 3, but in international distribution, the series had all of these episodes already premiere back in 1999. The series reviewed fairly well and grew a solid fan base, leading to a few things to happen post the ending of the series. First, in 2007, a special live-action presentation called An Evening with Dr. Katz live from the Comedy Central stage was put on, where Jonathan Katz, John Benjamin, and Laura Silverman would play their characters in real life to put together essentially what the show was, just now in person and in front of a live audience. This included bringing on other comedian guests to have their therapy session with Dr. Katz, and at the start of 2008, more special live performances were put on during SF Sketchfest in San Francisco, with more guests coming on, with one being a massive surprise at the end, with that being Robin Williams. Both of these shows would end up being sold out, showing the power of the fans in attendance to see Dr. Katz performed live. Before the therapy session was over, Jonathan himself announced that he has multiple sclerosis, as everyone shared their love and support for him. Now, in 2015, for the 20th anniversary of the series, this live version of Dr. Katz was brought back to SF Sketchfest, as well as performing at both 2016 and 2017's SF Sketchfest events. Plus, in 2015, a few live performances were held in Austin, Texas, at the Moon Tower Comedy and Oddity Festival. And outside of those performances, starting in 2017, a 15-episode series of new audio-only versions of Dr. Katz were made for Audible that would feature celebrity guests as well. When all was said and done, they were all put together into one big audiobook titled Dr. Katz the Audiobook as an exclusive to Audible. Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist may not have been the most memorable show of all time, but it did cultivate a pretty good sized fan base and a show that today, going back to it, still has a lot to enjoy. I do think that the show is a good time with some genuinely funny conversations. Going with the retro scripting improvised route really made for a natural and enjoyable experience. And I do recommend giving the series a watch. Yeah, the way the show looks can definitely turn some viewers away, but it feels so homemade and cozy, and it makes sense that home movies feels like the spiritual successor.
Please, for your own sake, fart in moderation.
I don't think there's any right way to introduce a show like South Park. I mean, it's so well known, it's still running, and there's no way that you don't already know the gist of it. South Park was the next animated project Comedy Central set out on producing. Much like the network's last animated series, South Park would have a unique animation style all its own, making it stand out separate from Dr. Katz and anything else out there on television. Now, South Park actually came to be thanks to early true word-of-mouth virality. Matt Stone and Trey Parker as a duo made 2 shorts, both titled The Spirit of Christmas. Later, they would be separated in names, with the first being titled Jesus vs. Frosty, and the second Jesus vs. Santa. The first was released in 1992, and the second was released in 1995. These shorts would give us the basic mold for the main characters and setting we would see when South Park would become something in an official capacity. You'd also see a lot of staple moments that would continue on into the show. Kenny being killed, crude humor, Cartman being, well, Cartman. It's just cool to see the origins of what would become South Park all here in this smaller production state. Now, there is a really fun story that leads from these shorts to the full series coming out, and while I won't go into every little detail about it all, I will give you a brief rundown of what happened based on the direct accounts of the people involved. Matt and Trey both went to the University of Colorado at Boulder and ended up creating the first short and premiered it for the others who were in the film department there, where it was well liked because it played directly into the college-aged audience. In 1993, 3, they both went out to Los Angeles, and that's where they connected with the Fox executive Brian Graydon, as he went out to see a screening of their indie film Cannibal the Musical, and from there, they hit it off. Brian wanted to see all that they had, what other projects or potential ideas could this duo come up with, and that's when they showed him their animated Spirit of Christmas short, and he loved it. So much so, in fact, that he took the tape it was on and had it copied over and over and over again, as he wanted to send it out to his friends as a Christmas card, and all of those friends loved it. Cut to the next year, and he wanted to see another one made, asking them directly to make it. Two things were happening now. Matt and Trey were working with Brian to develop South Park as a full-on concept before knowing truly what it was, and the other thing was Brian giving the two of them around a couple $1,000s to produce the second Spirit of Christmas short. The two of them would produce it within a week, getting barely any sleep to come up with the 5-minute runtime it would have. While this short would come with a label that added the name of South Park to it, and adding in of what this short was for, they really didn't have this grandiose plan for it, so they never even put their own names on it. Now, at this point, things go out of hand in both a good way and almost a bad way. It was good because those who received the tapes from Brian ended up copying them to more VHSs and handed them out to their friends, and so on and so forth, and before you know it, everyone has this tape of something called Jesus vs. Santa, and having a branding of the term South Park. This grew and grew and grew to the point where some months later, Matt and Trey ended up at a party where others there told them they have to see this tape, only for them to realize it was their very own short. There was this legitimate natural virality that came from the spreading of whatever this short was. The majority of people who saw it didn't know exactly what it was, but they liked it, they thought it was funny, and they just had to show their friends. The bad way things almost went stemmed from this moment as well, because Matt and Trey immediately were like, we're the ones who made this, but the others who showed them the tape were saying that they actually know the real people behind it, and it isn't Matt and Trey. Also, whoever those people would be, who are claiming this as their own, were apparently getting a meeting with MTV, and this is why you probably should put your name on something like this, even if it's for something like a Christmas gift for friends. Luckily, Brian went to MTV and took care of things, and that was all stopped. But what else was eventually stopped was Fox wanting South Park in general. In fact, the concept in general wasn't going further than all of these networks just wanting a meeting with the two, but it never led anywhere. Now, when Fox was not wanting to take South Park on, Brian stood with Matt and Trey as he believed in the idea and was directly involved in helping get the word out to friends, family, and beyond with the tapes, but also not so on purpose in front of other networks. Heck, at some point along the way of these bootleg tapes being made and passed around, someone ended up digitizing it and uploading it to the internet, allowing more and more people, specifically college students, to be able to check it out, letting it turn into an early example of internet virality. And that's when the internet was all like, you know what I'm saying? Something else cool from the internet at this time in relation to it all is seeing these newsgroup posts where people are discussing the Spirit of Christmas short, their thoughts on it, and more. These were posted to r/South Park a few years back by Gucci Piggy 90, and I just think they are really cool to see.
I can meet new friends on the internet. Here's a chat room.
Now, getting back on track, firstly, Brian would end up leaving his role as a Fox executive after them turning it down, saying, if Fox was not the kind of culture where South Park could be accommodated, then I questioned whether broadcast was the kind of medium where ideas could be accommodated. That's pretty upstanding. He couldn't understand why this couldn't have a legitimate place somewhere on TV. And Matt and Trey, well, they thought the same thing, as they were confused why no one wanted to move forward with the idea outside of initial meetings. They knew they had something that would do well because of how it spread, how much people enjoyed it, and just how unique it was compared to anything out there. They believed in it. They were starving artists, and they they couldn't give up on it, right? Well, the universe decided to do what it does best, and that's work in mysterious ways. Cut to Doug Herzog, the president of Comedy Central at the time, where Debbie Leibling, an executive in charge of developing projects for the network, comes to him saying he needs to check something out. This turned out to be virality doing its thing, as this was none other than the Spirit of Christmas Jesus vs. Santa South Park short. Doug said it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. Now, Comedy Central was recently in the business of making animated shows for the network, with Dr. Katz being their first venture into that realm. And Doug wasn't really sure, based on the material within the short, if this specifically could be on TV, but regardless, he wanted to work with whoever is behind it. Doug ends up flying them out to New York to meet with them, and they had a pretty solid time hitting it off, as Doug was just sort of fascinated by them because they were making stuff like these shorts, and according to Doug's own words, they were wild, wild, crazy young guys. But apparently, they had a love for Broadway, and were excited to be in the Big Apple to go see stuff like Katz, Les Mis, and the Phantom of the Opera. He genuinely thought they were just messing with him or something. Now, with the Book of Mormon becoming this massive Broadway play they created some years later, I guess they really were not messing around here. At this point now, Comedy Central said, make a pilot, giving something as crude as what South Park already was as a small short film a chance to develop into something for TV. Doug was worried based on the ideas Matt and Trey were saying they would incorporate in every episode, like killing off Kenny, but he just let them create. He didn't want to mess with what their minds could come up with. First though, there needed to be a pilot. They made it, and Comedy Central didn't particularly like it. They tried putting it in front of a focus group, and the ratings received back were the lowest of the lows, mainly scoring between 1s and 3s on a scale of 1 to 10. The main problem seemed to be what Matt and Trey were already hearing from the other networks they met with, which ultimately led to no's after the initial meetings. Adults were not wanting to watch a show with kid characters saying and doing vulgar things, and on the reverse, didn't want kids tuning into this because of its inappropriate nature. Brian took note of how poor this focus group went, claiming he had never seen anything worse, which of course led to fears of the show being picked up and if this was going to be his work for the next year. Now, when meeting with Matt, Trey, and Brian regarding it all, the three of them walked in wearing a matching set of shirts that had a check minus on them, representing the score they received from the focus test, proudly and comedically boasting these results. It seemed to at least keep the conversation fun, and wanting to follow through with the series to continue, Comedy Central would give notes and feedback that would have Matt and Trey redo the ending. An easier said than done feat at the time based on how the show was being made with cutout shapes of construction paper that is then animated through the use of stop motion. So after so much tedious work, they brought the pilot back to Comedy Central, and despite whatever scores they received from the focus group, they decided to keep South Park going, wanting to make it a full-on series. TV at the time wasn't like it is for us today. The amount of things that you could see or hear on a TV show, let alone a cartoon today on both cable or streaming, is nothing like how taboo it would be back then, even in the 90s. This would be a worry for Doug as the premiere of South Park was getting closer and closer, but everything turned out to be a huge win. South Park premiered in August of 1997 to around 1 million viewers. This was big at the time and even bigger for the network it was on. The success boomed for the show, and the characters of South Park were becoming popular and recognizable, even getting placed on the cover of Newsweek magazine. Poor Kenny. He got Mike Wazowski'd before Mike Wazowski would get Mike Wazowski'd. While Matt and Trey would move forward and continue to build South Park, Brian's role in helping make this happen was over, feeling fulfilled and wanting to move on to other ventures in the industry. I just think it's a pretty cool and inspiring story. Now, there's a lot more to Matt and Trey's story, Brian's story, and everything encompassing this whole journey, but I have to talk about the show at some point. South Park is a show that follows our core cast of kids that include Kyle Broflovsky, Stan Marsh, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. And beyond that, the extended cast of characters that range from all of the other kids they go to school with, the adults in their lives like the school faculty and their parents, but most important of all, the town of South Park that they live in, as it very much feels like its own character as well. South Park, while being a fictional town, is actually based off of the South Park Basin located in the Rocky Mountains, which, yes, is in Colorado, bringing everything back to where it originated from. Now, I'm not going to dig into the complete series and every little nuance of it. The show is still coming out. There are like 26 seasons with over 300 episodes, some specials, a movie. Heck, you could spend hours just talking about the video game side of South Park. So don't worry, this won't be like some 12-hour South Park video, and I'm just gonna talk about the series as a whole. For the most part, the series was basically episodic, with the easiest example to see things being reset every time, with Kenny being killed off in some messed up fashion, and we'd hear, oh my god, they killed Kenny, every episode. And then the next episode would happen and he'd be alive again. Smaller things and references would also weave throughout the series, but as time went on, the show did try to make things a bit more serialized, leading to whole seasons having storylines and plots that continue from episode to episode. And you'd be missing some sort of context by jumping into a random episode, not having watched any amount that had come before it during those seasons. I'm not gonna lie, it was around this time when the seasons started becoming one long story that took place over the entire season that I started falling off watching. It's not that I thought the show was getting bad or anything, but my care of tuning in on a constant basis was dwindling. And once you miss one, you might as well miss another, and then they pile up, and before you know it, you have a mountain of episodes that you haven't seen, and I don't know. I fell off. Man, I fell off. Same thing kind of happened to me with The Walking Dead. I stopped near the end of season 9, like nearly watching a full 9 seasons. Then, you miss an episode and you miss another episode and they all start piling up, and then there's this spin-off and that spin-off and this one and that one and also these spin-offs. It's just too much Walking Dead. This all just keeps piling and I'm too scared to even catch up. Anyway, South Park, sorry. Why I loved South Park in general is probably why most people did when they originally watched it. It's outrageous, it's messed up, it pokes fun at anything and everything, and occasionally we get a stoner towel or a Christmas turd. All of the characters have been built up so much and have distinct personalities, and a lot of the enjoyment was seeing the infighting between the main crew, and personally I enjoyed seeing how Cartman would end up doing things or seeing things his way, and really being this antagonistic character most of the time. What really pushed me when I was younger to even watch the show was the fact that parents didn't want their kids, for the most part, to watch it. I mentioned this in my MTV video when talking about shows like Beavis and Butthead, but it really was the same here with South Park, and it being too vulgar or messed up for kids. Now, it's all up to parents and their own discretion, but speaking as someone who was a kid at the time and has a first-hand account and experience with this, kids are going to find a way to still watch it. I know with what age we're at with the internet makes things a lot different for that now, but go back to the late 90s and early 2000s. This was the experience. Even though my mother warned me about it, yeah, I'd still watched it. My response to being told not to watch it was asking why. What's wrong with it? And when you don't get an answer, or heck, even when you do, you are going to have the curiosity to know. So you go and seek it out, you know? Either way, as long as I didn't repeat what I saw or heard and understood that it was only meant as entertainment, then it was fine. And I'm sure everyone has their own experiences with this in their life. That was just mine. Feel free to express yours in the comments down below.
That does it. Come on, dude.
As I got older, what I began to appreciate was how fast the show was made, making it more and more topical week to week, unlike other shows like Family Guy or Futurama or really anything, where they would usually be several months to even a year behind because of how long production would take. South Park was working in a way where Matt and Trey would start the production of an episode on a Thursday, working with others to come up with what they would include in this specific episode, going from that to writing the script, to then having every bit of the production working over 100 hours a week in some cases, which overworking is a different story, and I think any sort of crunch time like that is no way to live by. Just wanted to make that clear. But when all that was said and done, episodes would be turned into Comedy Central for immediate release on TV. Literally, they had episodes that would usually be turned in hours before they were scheduled to go live. Why did they do this? Well, it made the show unique in being able to stay as creatively fresh as possible, as well as letting them be as topical as possible, something that can backfire, and I'll get into that in a moment. But Matt and Trey loved working on a one-week schedule because they felt it added so much to the show. They weren't creating a season and then turning it in, they were creating an episode every week as it was premiering. It seemed unheard of at the time, and even today, it still sounds that way. How did they do it? Well, aside from the writing, the show, after the pilot that took so many countless hours to produce because it was all construction paper cutout stop animation, was transitioned to being animated through different computer programs to work with all of the assets, allowing them to produce the animation at a much faster rate. Early on, episodes would be able to be completed within a few weeks, but this would eventually lead to one a week being made, with some even only taking less than a full work week, which is kind of insane when you think about it. With the staff for the show getting a lot bigger over time, yeah, those 100+ hour work weeks I would assume are extremely cut down and divided up between everyone if they are able to produce episodes this fast, but it's still a lot. Now, like I said, this nearly instant news cycle led to a lot of good and also some more bad moments, and not bad in a really bad way, but well, let's talk about the main and most memorable example of being a week-to-week show like this. Back in 2016, there was a presidential race going on and South Park was carrying along plot points to parody the political news cycle. However, for the big episode of the season that would come out following the results of the election, they were pretty sure that the opposite person was going to be elected instead of who did, and because they had already scripted, recorded, and animated their parody of it all, they had to then quickly pivot, jump back in, and redo part of it in an extremely quick manner to have it ready for release on TV the following day. Plus, they let one of the F words go uncensored in the episode during its regular airing time, which is something they would only do for late night airings or on streaming services. Seriously, their ability to produce the show at this pace was nearly unbelievable. But if you want to believe it, there is a documentary titled 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, that shows the process that Matt, Trey, and everyone working on the show go through to produce an episode within a week or less to have it ready for TV every week. I still think the week-to-week method really works for the show, because when I was heavily watching it, I liked how relevant they were. It was crazy to see something happen in the world and have it reflected on the next episode of the show. If you take that factor away, yeah, the show still stands on its own, but it is something special that I feel a lot of people appreciate about it. I do love the original premiere of the pilot episode where before the episode starts, we get an introduction to who the creators are with a special fireside chat with Matt and Trey, allowing the audience to understand and take in the type of humor they share and a bit about the creative process behind the series, what to expect from the series, and see what people like Brian or Doug liked in these two's personalities and duo dynamic. As far as any episode that really stuck with me over the years, there are a few that I really remember. First is Chinpokomon, which was an episode poking fun at the Pokemon boom and craze that was starting at the end of the 1990s and... I mean, look around me. I am a product of growing up in that craze. Stop making fun of me. There was an episode where Cartman can't wait any longer to get his hands on a Nintendo Wii, which at the time was like impossible to get. But here he tries freezing himself to help make the weeks go by for the release date to get there sooner, but he accidentally freezes himself hundreds of years into the future. And maybe I'm just nostalgic for it because it's big again right now thanks to a bunch of Twitch streamers playing together. The World of Warcraft episode. There was so much in this episode that stuck with so many people. I do think it was so cool that Blizzard actually collaborated with the South Park team, you know, helped them with some assets so they could actually do and capture things to stage a bunch of the machinima used. It's cool to know from people like content creator and ex-Blizzard employee Pirate Software that this character in the episode was actually based off of a real person who worked at Blizzard, who just so happened to be his dad. And recently, I believe content creator Mizkif recreated the South Park gaming basement from the episode to stream playing the game. I can mention so many episodes of South Park here and there that I remember fondly, but I think I've talked about South Park for long enough here. But as for now, South Park is still massive today. Of course, there was the movie Bigger, Longer, and Uncut that released in the summer of 1999, which ended up grossing $83.1 million on a $21 million budget, received critical acclaim for the most part, and had so many memorable moments that I remember kids repeating in school for many years after. That didn't contradict what I said earlier. Yeah, we were told not to repeat things. It doesn't mean we actually didn't. Anyway, right now the series is going back and forth between releasing small batch seasons of the show and several specials that are on Paramount+. There, of course, is a plethora of moments that led to some major controversies, most notably when dealing with the depiction of religious figures or even leaders of other countries. But South Park was what it was, a show that rarely would get censored for what it said, how it said it, and what the point of it was. South Park is still as topical as ever. Matt and Trey have been able to do so much with this series and basically continue on making more because the show hasn't been canceled and there are no plans for it to stop anytime soon. Plus, they've been able to venture out to other projects that end up with their own levels of varying success. I definitely want to get back into South Park more. I have checked out some of the specials that they've released more recently and have had fun with them, but I've missed a bunch of recent seasons of the show. South Park is polarizing. There's a lot of people who love it and a lot of people who just don't care for it. In general, I just think it's cool for how it came to be, how it's created on a technical level, and all of the boundaries that it pushed past. I want to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, Vessi. 2025 is full of new adventures, and thanks to Vessi, there isn't any kind of weather that is stopping me from going on them. I love traveling, I love going outdoors, and no matter what the season brings, I need my shoes to be durable and comfortable. My older shoes couldn't keep up. I've been rocking several different pairs of Vessi shoes now, and I haven't had a wet sock since. And I appreciate the range of looks for every occasion. Between traveling in rainy places or dealing with constant waves of snow, I don't have anything to worry about in regards to still going out and being active because my Vessi shoes have me covered when it comes to handling the elements, all while having a nice sense of style and allowing me to still feel comfortable wearing them. Going outside or being active has never felt or looked better. I've enjoyed my walks more, and I genuinely look forward to going on them every day. Vessi shoes have truly made the difference for me. Recently, I have been trying out the Vessi Weekend Chelsea sneakers, which gives you a perfect comfort feel made with eco-friendly materials while still having all the good stuff that Vessi is known for built right into them. Just as you'd expect with Vessi, they are durable to any element or weather condition you come across, and yes, they are completely 100% waterproof. It's a technology that blows my mind that it exists, but it's real, and you'll be a member of the Dry Socks Club too when you wear them. I no longer look at the weather as something stopping me from ever going outside. I am saying yes more and more to go do adventurous things, and nothing is gonna slow that down now. Rain, snow, or shine, it doesn't matter, I'm still gonna head out. Take your next step toward a better you with Vessi, and start strong with Vessi shoes by heading to vessi.com/JordanFringe to embrace every rainy day and enjoy an instant 15% off your first purchase at checkout. Thanks again to Vessi for sponsoring this video.
Bug off!
Ah yes, Bob and Margaret. Who didn't know about this one? Probably a lot of people, honestly. At least nowadays. This actually wasn't a Comedy Central original show, but instead one of the animated series that they had received through syndication. Originally, the show came from both Canada and the UK thanks to a joint production between Nelvana and Channel 4. I'm not sure how you classify or see acquired programming. It's like, I know it's not from Comedy Central, but if that's where I know it from, if where I've seen it from, then in my head canon, that's where it's from. It's just how it works. It's like all of the cartoons that were on the Nicktoons Network channel that weren't really Nicktoons, but you know, they felt like real Nicktoons. Bob and Margaret falls into the category of animated shows following a married couple who are going through their life with no children, unless you count their dogs, as they navigate the everyday situations that come from living life and hitting this middle-aged point where you're not as young as you once were, but you're not old yet. There's nothing too particularly out of the ordinary here. These two end up dealing with what average everyday people go through, what married couples worry about and stress over, and dealing with your own perception of aging. The series starts off with a great pilot that introduces you to Bob and Margaret, with Bob, who is this dentist, struggling with the fact that he is turning 40 years old and is starting to go through this midlife crisis. His wife Margaret is at home planning preparations for this surprise party, getting all of their friends over and hidden before Bob comes back. But things don't go well, as when Bob comes home, he doesn't give Margaret a chance to cue everyone hiding to jump out and surprise him. He instead continues into this bit of a breakdown that he was having, discussing things like if he should leave his job, if Margaret regrets not having kids, and this only continues to escalate when Bob keeps on ranting about things and eventually getting partially undressed as he is unaware that anyone else is there. So when Margaret is urging him to put some pants back on, he takes it personally, with it being something about him or the spark in their relationship here fading, because she always loved when he would do stuff like this, making things more awkward, mainly for the guests still in hiding. Bob starts talking bad about all of them, thinking they aren't even really good friends with the others that they call friends, and frankly, he doesn't even like them. His crash out here is only worsened by saying things like Margaret should maybe go and find another husband, with her now up in the bedroom crying at the disaster this surprise party turned into. Bob then suggests maybe that they should have a kid, and she just ends up bringing him some pants, and he thinks that they do have dinner plans for his birthday and just goes out to wait in the car, while Margaret doesn't know how to deal with the others who, yes, are still in hiding and have heard every bit of this. She then just turns off the lights and leaves with Bob, leaving the others hiding in darkness at the house. There is something a bit more important about this first episode though too, aside from it being a really funny and honestly stressful to watch opener to the series, but I'll get to that properly in a moment here. For me, what makes this show a bit more special than it may be is the fact of its creators, David Fine and Alison Snowden, who themselves are husband and wife, with David being from Canada and Alison being from the UK, making the joint production from both countries for Bob and Margaret feel more at home. These two actually met at the National Film and Television School in England, with them eventually creating George and Rosemary, an animated short that would end up being nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Short Film at the 60th Academy Awards. From here, they would end up receiving partial funding from the National Film Board of Canada, and over 2 years would develop the short animated film Bob's Birthday. Bob's Birthday not only would get nominated and then win the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film at the 67th Academy Awards, but would also end up as the template and pilot episode for Bob and Margaret, which is the one I just talked about. See, I told you I'd bring it all around. The show itself would end up running for 4 seasons with 52 episodes total, which is a pretty solid run. The first 2 seasons would end up taking place in the UK with the characters going about their lives there, but for the 3rd and 4th seasons, the show would have the characters move to Canada. While this may have seemed like a way to freshen things up and change the formula a bit, it really boils down to the partnership between Nelvana and Channel 4 not continuing. Nelvana was already putting up the majority of the money, and once Channel 4 had pulled out of funding, the series needed to start telling more Canadian-based stories thanks to Canadian content or CanCon rules, which required this, and for the show to still receive funding, this was the natural course of action. It definitely changed up the dynamic of the show to have a slight bit of a fish out of water story, but it kept in line the lives of Bob and Margaret and how they operate. Now, Comedy Central only ever aired the first 2 seasons of the show, which probably was annoying for those who watched to not get, or heck, even know that there were more seasons, because the ratings for the show on the network were pretty good, following right under South Park. A couple years later, the other 2 seasons would premiere in the US through Showtime. I know this is a Comedy Central based video, but I think a lot of this context matters, especially with the series actually having an audience on the network for a bit. What made Bob and Margaret work was the fact that the show was really relatable. Maybe not so much to a younger demographic or even the more college-aged one who was tuning into Comedy Central, but it painted a realistic picture of a couple who aren't perfect people. They are just humans. humans. They go through ups and downs in their lives, they make mistakes that they would grow and learn from, but much like the average person, can fall back on that growth, make the same mistake, and then learn from it once again. These lessons never feel like lessons that are being outright explained or taught to you to follow, but rather shown in the more relatable ways of stuff like struggling with weight. The way Bob and Margaret communicate as partners, who are still trying to figure things out in life and where it takes them, feels natural and makes you honestly feel better if you are in your 20s or 30s and still figuring things out for yourself, because there is no time limit to do so. Life isn't a race, there aren't instructions you have to follow, and the more adult you become, the more you realize that most adults don't have it all together or figured out yet. There's something wholesome in the show as it explores this. While the show in the States would be rated TV-14, the series had much lower age ratings in other markets like in Canada and the UK, which definitely feels odd based on the show having random bits of nudity or risque moments and some foul language. Honestly, any of the dentistry stuff was more horrific. They are up there with how terrifying Braceface tried to make the dentist look. Anyway, there's not a whole lot to say on this series. I think it's pretty decent, the art style is cozy, and I enjoy the character dynamics of Bob and Margaret. As for Allison and David, they would continue on working in the animation space, even creating Ricky Sprocket, Showbiz Boy, and Shaun the Sheep, a couple of shows I may cover in the future. Heck, even their daughter Lily got into the industry as well, as she was the original voice actor of Peppa Pig. More recently, another project of theirs titled Animal Behavior was nominated for Best Animated Short Film at the 91st Academy Awards. I'd recommend giving the show a chance, it's inoffensive and I had a nice time watching it.
There must be something decent to watch. We're going to win, right, Joe Camo? Joe Camo!
Have you ever heard of a little show called SNL, aka Saturday Night Live? Well, we're not talking about that. We instead are talking about a segment on SNL called Saturday TV Funhouse, a segment that would air in between other segments of the show that would feature parodies of well-known cartoons ranging from the Hanna-Barbera library to the Disney catalog, as well as stop-motion specials and even retro-style PSAs. These would turn so many wholesome things into not-so-wholesome things, much like what the internet does today. I mean, I can never look at the Smurfs the same way after their Smurfette Show parody. I can't smurfing stand it. Now, while this segment would continue on from 1996 until 2008 for SNL, there was a chance to spin this off into its own form of new series. Originally, there was a pilot made for Fox where Saturday TV Funhouse would try to become more of its own thing while still having parody-esque segments, but now wanting to incorporate more live-action segments and puppetry. The pilot wasn't picked up as even the creator of it, Robert Smigel, kind of understood why. He said, and I'm going to substitute the cursing with Smurf here, I know this thing is all about Smurf the networks, they're idiots, but I don't know, this show has a disturbing element. He said this at an event called The Other Network, a several-night event where creators of show pilots that didn't get picked up were shown and talked about with the creators in front of a sold-out audience. These were basically a way to say, screw the networks for not picking up these programs. That event took place in 2002, but going back a couple years, Robert's idea was able to still come to life. Rather than having this Bozo the Clown parody the original pilot was trying to do, Comedy Central would enter in the picture and want to give this series a chance, as it would now have this Pee-wee's Playhouse parody set up to it. It would be hosted by this character named Doug Dale, along with his Anna pals who were puppets. It really is a Pee-wee's Playhouse-like setup, and every episode had a different theme to it to change things up and set the tone for the episode, while we would get segments that cut in between those moments, featuring the cartoons and other stuff you'd expect from knowing what TV Funhouse was. The series would feature some familiar faces you'd recognize today, like Tim Meadows, Bob Odenkirk, and Maya Rudolph, just to name a few, but I think one of the most recognizable, though, would have to be Triumph the Insult Comic Dog. He's a puppet dog with a cigar in his mouth, known for, well, his insults, appearing here and there since 1997 doing his thing. He first appeared as a segment on Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and even appeared in an Eminem music video before Eminem would do his own puppet and voice work for Triumph at the 2004 MTV Video Music Awards. Why is Triumph so important to bring up? Well, he was created and voiced by Robert, and would go on to just be this other thing that would go on to leave its own legacy. In fact, Triumph is still around, with his most recent appearance as of making this video being at the People's March in Washington, D.C. in January of this year. While Triumph, well, triumphed for Robert, TV Funhouse did not, as the show only lasted for one season with 8 episodes. While the show had the support of Comedy Central, and it was well enough liked behind the scenes, it just got too costly as each episode would constantly go over the budget allotted, making it a money sink for the network. work. On the other side of things, Robert felt that dealing with all the puppetry they had was getting too hard and frustrating to continue to do. It wasn't an easy shoot, and now the show lives on with 8 episodes that you'll either find a hit or a miss, as there was no renewal for a second season. Now, there was an episode that when I watched made me have this weird flashback of somehow seeing this show when I was younger, and that's thanks to episode 4, which featured 2 distinct segments that were stuck somewhere in the depths of my brain: Fetal Scooby-Doo and Jokimal, which was a parody fusion of Pokemon and Joe Camel, the cigarette mascot.
Team Murder! Joe Camel.
Jokimal, toys you'll crave.
And man, am I glad that when seeing something like this as a kid that I didn't get addicted to anything that would alter the rest of my life, having a chokehold on me and potentially financially ruin me. Whew, thank God. TV Funhouse was a cool experiment that did feature some fun animated segments and a cool premise, but that's basically how I'd put it. It's cool, but I don't think it's particularly great, but I also don't think it's the worst thing in the world. There's a lot of good stuff to appreciate here. You know, it is cool to go back and check out all the work that was done with the animated segments and see the cool puppetry and seeing who you might recognize being involved in the production from back then. But other than that, there isn't too much here that you're missing out on if you've never seen it.
Are we stuck in here?
Yep. Clerks, the animated series, falls into a bit of a similar category, with it not originally being a Comedy Central show, but at the same time, Comedy Central kind of became a home for it. And I'll explain that in a little bit here, because there's surprisingly a lot going on behind the scenes with this show. Clerks, the animated series, is exactly what the title describes. It's an animated version of the characters seen in the original Clerks movie. While there is a Clerks 2 and 3, as well as a few Jay and Silent Bob spin-off films, when this animated version was in production, only the original 1994 film was out there. You have Dante and Randall, who work at this little quick-stop convenience store, who are directionless and deal with their day-to-day lives and dealing with whatever interactions or mischief comes their way. Oh, and Jay and Silent Bob are there too because, well, they're just as important, and for me, when it comes to anything Clerks related, are my favorite parts. Now, the story of how we get this Clerks animated series to what ended up happening to it is pretty interesting. The original film and what it made at the box office helps get the ball rolling for more from Kevin Smith in general. That's why we see the View Askew-universe catalog of films and projects that Kevin has made. That's a whole other thing to dive into, and we aren't doing that. At least not today. Only 1 year after Clerks came out and put Kevin Smith on the map, Clerks the TV sitcom was put into production and a pilot episode was created. There was only one problem: Kevin Smith wasn't involved in it, and also he had no idea that it was even being done. Before it was all finished, this was only found out thanks to Brian O'Halloran, who played Dante in the film, as he met with a new agent that asked if he was auditioning for this Clerks pilot, which naturally confused him, causing him to call Kevin and see if Kevin knew, and he didn't. And since this was Kevin's original concept when it comes to what the movie was, he was interested in being part of the production. And now, before we get into the rest of it, I am sure you're wondering, why wouldn't he be involved in this in the first place? Well, Hollywood happened. Clerks was originally purchased by Miramax, who was owned by Disney, and they are going to be the ones that hold back every part of this here at the end of the day, as you'll soon see. One, they could do what they wanted with the idea of Clerks because it was such a universal idea to play with, that they could then make something like a TV show with the same title to capitalize off the success and namesake of the movie. That's part of the reason why they get the ownership. But remember this for later, as that ownership really meant stuff like this, the TV pilot, could happen. So cut back to Kevin wanting to come aboard and help, but it was just too late in the process. They didn't want his script that he would create, and they also didn't want the main 2 actors from the movie to play Dante and Randall, who did end up auditioning. Kevin at the time was already working on his next film, with that being Mallrats, and funny enough, this pilot for the Clerks show really ended up looking like they fused the ideas of Clerks and Mallrats together based on the setting where these 2 workers would be working. Either way, the pilot didn't work out. It didn't have the charm that the original movie had, the characters of Dante and Randall didn't match up to what made them relatable and likable in the film, and the jokes weren't hitting nor delivered in that more casual way you'd see in the film. Of course, this was meant to now be a sitcom, and I get that with that, so many things are going to be changed, and translating what made the film work to this setting would only work in the base concept concept of, yeah, I guess these two are people who just work somewhere. Maybe with Kevin Smith's help and the original actors being on board, it could have, but I guess we'll never know. So many people involved here ended up talking about their experience during this time in an interview with Andrew Buss for Consequence.net. It was a bad experience all around, and from Kevin's perspective, it was clear that he didn't feel wanted for any part of this production. He was even there during part of the audition process, and with how it was all going and what the show itself looked to be, he, along with his production partner, Scott Mosier, left with Kevin saying, "Let's get out of here, this ain't ours." Continuing on about how they had no say, they aren't going to cast the original actors, they didn't want their ideas, so it was clear that they would be better off not being worried about being involved. The other thing on Kevin's mind, however, was getting into the animation business, coming up with a concept that let Clerks pivot into a new medium and wanted to eventually do something with this. It was still 1995, and it wouldn't be until a couple years later when Kevin ended up working with David Mandel to bring Clerks to life in the form of animation. David was big as a writer thanks to his work on Seinfeld, and through being a fan of Kevin's work, them having a shared agent at the time, and the chance to work together on this animated venture, they ended up linking together. Kevin and Scott would gradually be building up this grander idea of what a cartoon could do for something like Clerks. They would have more creative freedom to make the characters do whatever, it's animated. They would just need to be more restrictive on stuff like language, or like what Jay and Silent Bob would be doing, as they couldn't be selling what they were in the movie. So with some tweaking of what could work for the cartoon, and then by taking the rejected script that they had made for the sitcom, they spun it into their new ideas and they had something here. From there began the meeting and pitching frenzy of taking the idea to different networks, and ultimately there was no real bite from any of them. That is until they met with UPN, a newer network started up by Paramount. Working there was Dean Valentine, a former Disney executive who loved the pitch, loved everyone involved, and believed in the show, telling them that it could last forever on this network, the sky's the limit, and offered them a 12-episode initial deal, which was basically half of a season order. Unlike nowadays where we barely get 6 episodes that make up what a network likes to call a season of TV. I will forever be salty about this. Sorry. You know what? I'm not sorry.
We do the Science Says segments.
UPN was interested in having a larger driving factor to their network being adult animated shows, and the offer made from them looked very good. They had the guarantee that the episodes would make it to air right away. David would speak with Kevin saying that being at UPN would be the right play here. Who cares about the glamour of being on a more established network like ABC and be lost in the shuffle of their other programs when you could end up being the ones leading the charge with more freedoms at UPN? Everything seems great, everyone involved really wants this to go through, and the rest should all be good. But let's see how all of this starts unraveling thanks to Disney once again, as well as another figure who at this time had a lot of power in Hollywood and co-created Miramax. So Dean tries to call up Disney, speaking with Michael Eisner, who he used to work for, and wanted to make sure that they could make this happen properly. But upon hearing about this so-called pitch for Clerks and learning that ABC had already passed on it, he wanted to hear it. And then it became pressure on every side here for a deal to be made with ABC and Disney. Now they are basically forced into a meeting with Michael Eisner, who was the head of Disney at the time, and Bob Iger, who was in charge of ABC at the time, thanks to Harvey Weinstein, as he tried to make it seem like he was coming in to help to make a better deal happen. After this, the offer from them was a 6-episode deal with no guarantee for it to air, and of course they were all talking to one another and saying, no, that's stupid, of course we would rather go work with UPN, it's a no-brainer. Harvey pushed onto them that it would be smart to be here with ABC, keep the brand in the family that already owns the other parts of it, saying this and so much more to convince them that the UPN deal was bad and that this deal was great. They all describe it as them feeling like they were forced to take this deal, and it was made to seem like they had to do it as well because of the IP ownership. But that's the thing, Kevin's hand was forced here, as to even get this cartoon done, there was a license deal that was made that would then officially give Disney the rights to it. So whether there was trickery or lies being told, Kevin didn't know at the time how much power he had in the situation, and could have turned this down and done what he had wanted, what they all had wanted. For Clerks, the only rights that Disney had were for live action related things like making the failed TV pilot. So in the end, the Clerks cartoon ended up going to ABC, and they all admit going with them was a mistake. Okay, so now the show is with ABC, they have 6 episodes to make, but no guarantee of any of them actually making it to air. And wouldn't you know it, all the worries that you would have here came true. The behind the scenes production wasn't great, constantly constantly having more restrictive cuts and edits and things they couldn't do being told to them, making them question why the network would even want to buy Clerks if they didn't want it to be Clerks. The network was also changing, becoming a lot more successful in the game show scene with the rise of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, putting cartoons on the back burner. It just wouldn't be worth their time, or more importantly to them, their money, to even worry about them. So when it came time to actually put out the show on TV, ABC did everything wrong you could think of. First, there was little to no promotion for the show given, then constant release dates would be pushed around of when to expect the show even to premiere, and then out of the 6 episodes, only 2 of them would premiere on TV, and to make matters worse, they weren't even the first 2 episodes. They were just 2 random ones, being episodes 2 and 4. Now, that last part may not be the worst if it weren't for the fact that these episodes were not the ones you'd want to show off first. Part of episode 2's charm is that it relies on you having seen episode 1. The joke of the second episode is that it's a clip show, flashing back to the first episode for part of the bit, but without that first episode, part of the joke doesn't work, making you forcefully not get part of it. But episode 4 was the first episode that was shown, and it's a courtroom episode that also relies on you knowing who these characters are and what has been established in the world of the show up to that point. It felt like the network was really trying to kill it, but everyone saw the writing on the wall and eventually got the news that the show was canceled and the remaining 4 episodes wouldn't make it to air. And now with these 6 episodes, Kevin wanted to at least do something with them, looking mainly to the audience built around the physical side of things, opting to make a DVD release that has all of the episodes, added on some commentary, and advertise it as uncensored with never before seen episodes. The commentary featured so much discussion of what happened behind the scenes and the pains of just getting this series to be what it was out there. This was released in 2001 as well as Kevin Smith's other film Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Now, 1 year later, the remaining 4 episodes of the cartoon that never got shown on ABC would get their first chance to be shown on TV thanks to none other than Comedy Central, all on December 14th, 2002, and beyond that would see airings on Adult Swim and a couple other networks as well. While what happened to the show sucked, it was still cool to see a DVD get a full release as well as an eventual TV premiere of all the episodes through Comedy Central. That's pretty neat. But the most annoying part about what happened to it on ABC and the viewers not getting a chance to initially see it was that it was actually really good. Clerks the animated series was such a fun take on the world that Kevin had built. While it wouldn't be 100% like the original film was, it didn't change things up in a way where it would feel more like the sitcom pilot. They made the show feel more like how the rest of the Clerks and Clerks spin-off films would feel, having a more silly tone to it. Dante and Randall would get up to a bunch of random shenanigans. Jay and Silent Bob would also be getting up to their own shenanigans, and it honestly really makes you feel more invested in the mundane lives of these characters and how ridiculous things could get. Having this and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back coming out around each other really, in my opinion, helped push notoriety to Clerks in general again. And I mean that in the way of viewing the characters in it. The first film is still great. It has great dialogue, but because it's so indie and the furthest separated now from the View Askew-verse, it feels now like the odd one out in a way. The series was also well animated and looked really cool, having a very stylized, bold outline and jagged edged look to everything that fits the vibe of the show incredibly. And speaking of animation, there was a crazy gag in the 4th episode that right at the moment of a verdict being given, we instead get given a disclaimer about the rest of the script being lost and that the Korean animators had to come up with everything to finish it off, and it's a wild ride. I just like that the show felt fresh and that going and watching it today, it still feels that way. Much like you'd see in other animated shows at the time, there would be disclaimers that state that this is a work of fiction and that they are just making jokes, and celebrities that may be referenced to and or drawn in likeness have no involvement and have not endorsed the show unless they were in it and voicing themselves. Like Charles Barkley, Kenny Mayne, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Michael Buffer. They all voiced themselves. They had other celebrities doing some voice work as other characters as well, like Bryan Cranston and Alec Baldwin, but there was one case that was really weird that involved Patrick Swayze. They tried to get him to voice himself, but he wasn't into it, so they had Gilbert Gottfried come in and voice him, and there's apparently a lot more to that whole Patrick Swayze story, with him thinking that they were making fun of him in a way that he didn't like, and the studio adding in weird requests for them to add into the episode. Anyway, with how things have been in the fandom of trying to get others to watch the show because it genuinely is pretty good, Clerks the animated series has, much like the original film, become a cult classic in its own right. It's short, it's funny, and you may just want more, and hey, there might be. Aside from all the Clerks related stuff that has happened since in the world of film, Kevin has stated that he has plans to make a follow-up animated movie called Clerks Sell Out, where kind of parodies Kevin making the original Clerks film in general. There were some problems with this because of a pretty bad split between Miramax and the Weinsteins, leading to Disney not willing to work with them, and Disney has the rights to the animated version of Clerks, which is why in 2007 Smith stated that you'd sooner see a Jay and Silent Bob cartoon, as specifically those characters were technically still owned by him, and wouldn't you know it, we did get a Jay and Silent Bob cartoon in 2013 called Jay and Silent Bob's Super Groovy Cartoon Movie. And later on down the line, we would eventually get Clerks 3, which would end up taking a lot of what Clerks Sell Out would be, and also a maybe promise of the cartoon coming back in the form of a show, possibly at some point, maybe in the future, who really knows. But what I do know is that Clerks the animated series is a pretty fun, short-lived animated show that has a crazier story to it all than you'd imagine. Plus, we get some McDonald's lore about nothing being able to kill the Grimace. As a massive fan of Grimace, I appreciate the detail about this being something that they had to get approved by McDonald's. And don't question why I am such a big fan of Grimace. It's obvious. Just look at him. At some point, I will put this costume to use. Okay, leave me alone now. Just get to the next show already. While Kid Notorious may not be a show that is remembered by a lot of people, there is something a bit surprisingly fun here. Even if that fun is a little bit stupid. It's silly and mostly nonsensical, but stupid in the most lighthearted way. You see, this show is actually about a real-life person named Robert Evans, mainly known for his work as a film producer and studio executive, and here, Robert Evans even voices himself. As a person, Robert Evans is just as he's portrayed here in the cartoon, for the most part. He was said to be kind of suave and infectious, and I only know anything about him in this manner thanks to the show The Offer, where it detailed the behind-the-scenes madness that went into making the film The Godfather. There he was portrayed by the actor Matthew Goode, and I must say, he did a pretty spot-on job to channel the mannerisms and vocal inflections of Robert. I guess you can say he did a good job. I hate myself. And I recommend giving that show a watch. I feel like no one talked about it enough, and if you love the behind-the-scenes stuff that goes into the dealings of getting a movie made, and especially for The Godfather, what it took beyond all that you'd expect, it's a pretty fun ride. And honestly, if you want to see an interesting life in general, read up and look into Robert Evans. There's plenty of ups and downs, and you almost wouldn't believe a fraction of what he was a part of or got into. But at least at this point now, by the time Kid Notorious was a thing in the early 2000s, he was able to take and make jokes aimed at himself or his career and just play into it. Like in real life, Robert Evans was a big deal. He was producing hits, he married movie stars, and he just had this way of speaking that truly made him perfect for the industry that he was in. So now when the idea of a cartoon about how his image was once viewed comes into play, he was on board to play into these views of himself. At this point in Robert Evans' life, he began a renaissance of attention through his autobiography, The Kid Stays in the Picture, which had the tagline of A Notorious Life. You can kind of see where the name Kid Notorious would come from. At the start of the 2000s, this was then turned into both an audiobook voiced by him and even a documentary where he was the narrator. When this all sparked a major interest into Robert's life and wanting more from the man that helped bring The Godfather, Love Story, Chinatown, and more to life, Evans wanted the vision of who he was, this person that had all this mythos to him, to be what he was still seen as. To capitalize on the success of talking about his success, I guess, he worked with Brett Morgan, the co-director of the documentary, to make Kid Notorious. While, like I said, he would end up voicing himself, he wouldn't be made to look like himself, but rather resemble the younger version of himself. The series would play up everything you'd be made to think of Robert. He was a ladies' man, acting like Johnny Bravo if Johnny Bravo had a 100% success streak. He lived this luxurious life, he dresses like he's worth $1 billion, and most importantly, he's too cool to lose his cool. The show takes him as a character and places him within these ridiculous situations where, I don't know, he might start a gang war over a rap-based musical version of The Godfather, or find himself to be in a plot that the 2014 movie The Interview would eventually be oddly similar to, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, part of the goal of the show was to emphasize the suave nature Robert had, and they did that by trying to make him more like James Bond. Because basically anyone could picture exactly what James Bond's attitude, presence, and swagger looked like. I can't believe I wrote swagger into my script. There's a first time for everything, right? In the series here, we'd see Robert get into all of these scenarios where he would often get to take shots at his own career or other bits of Hollywood that he was or wasn't involved in, even including beefs that he had with other people in the industry, regardless if we knew about them then or not. What is real for sure, and what we do know, is that aside from Robert voicing himself, we would also have his butler in the show voiced by his actual butler, which is interesting to say the least. There was also Slash, yes, that Slash from Guns N' Roses, who is in the series and he is voicing himself as well. This may seem random or odd for the sake of just doing something weird for the show, but in fact, these two were neighbors neighbors and friends in real life, so it's a little bit wholesome that he was included here. As far as any other main characters, there is Tolly May, a maid that is funny enough based on a maid that worked for Robert at the end of the 1960s and start of the 1970s, whose name was actually Tolly Mae Wilson. Then there is his cat in the show named Puss Puss. Definitely lots of fart jokes and slapstick moments coming from the cat more than anything. The series would feature depictions of celebrities, especially ones that were big at the time like Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Leonardo DiCaprio, etc. But there is another character that I'm forgetting, and we've been kind of seeing it a lot so far, and that's the backgrounds, more specifically Robert's estate. According to background artist Jerry Richards, Bob wanted the house to be portrayed as a fifth character. They blended the use of traditional 2D hand-drawn animation and Flash to be able to have extremely accurate proportions for characters within the setting that they're in, as well as build a catalog of assets to pull from in order to produce the episodes in a few weeks with a team of 16 animators. While there was a lot of technical work and a hardworking team animating the series, the look of the show is a whole other thing. You either like it for what it was, or you probably just don't. I don't mind the look of the show, but something about it does feel more boring or bland than you'd expect. I mean, this guy, Robert, is supposed to be larger than life, and unless this is meant to contrast that in some sort of way, it feels restricted. But like I said, I don't hate it, it's fine. Maybe it's the off look of proportion sizes like with Robert's head here, as it is pretty big compared to the rest of his body, which for some reason gives me Habbo Hotel vibes. If you know, you know. All of this can mainly be forgiven or overlooked if the show itself is good, right? So, is it? Meh, it's alright. Yeah, I don't think you'll find what could be described as comedy gold here, but Kid Notorious has a fair bit of really funny moments sprinkled throughout. The unserious nature of it is nice, but some of the more sillier aspects of the show definitely will make you groan more than your want to keep watching it. By far the best part is Robert himself and how he carries the way he spoke and continued on what hooked many people through his book and documentary. You really can just sit there and listen to him talk and not get bored. The series premiered on October 22nd, 2003, only lasting for one season with 9 episodes, having it come to an end before the end of the same year. There wouldn't be a season 2, and it's definitely a weird thing that comes closer to the end of Robert's career in general, but it also feels on brand for Robert of all people to want to have a cartoon all about him, fantasizing a version of him that both no longer existed because of time passing and never existed because it was playing it up in more fictitious ways. The series wanted to be outrageous, and in the era of Comedy Central having South Park really be their main raunchy vessel, they were banking on trying to be shocking, even putting out statements like advertising the season finale as promising it to be one of the most controversial episodes yet. But in the end, it's a short 9-episode watch. There's not a lot to take away from it, but it's an interesting, exaggerated look into the life of an interesting person, to say the least. If you do want something to take away, we should look back to what he was doing when it came to the legendary movies he was a part of. He put it best when speaking to Variety in 2002, saying, "We didn't strive for commercial, we went for original. We fell on our asses on some of them, but we also touched magic." It's a sentiment that can apply to so many things that I feel anyone can understand. In general, if Kid Notorious isn't for you, at least go ahead and check out The Offer, just if you want to learn a bit about who he was, especially in conjunction to the production of The Godfather. But yeah, Kid Notorious is an okay show that served more of a fantasy for Robert than it did as a fun series for the viewers.
Did you write that down? Good.
And turn to something else. Is something else on?
Shorties Watchin' Shorties, a show about a pair of babies watching TV. Okay, it's a little more than that, but that's the basic premise. What they would be watching would be these animated shorts that were based on comedians' routines. So if you ever wondered where something like this animated Dane Cook short came from, that you probably saw online or watched in the early days of YouTube, yeah, that's from this series here.
Always waiting for the impact. Where are my shoes? Where are my shoes?
If that made you feel a type of way or give you some sort of nostalgic brain blast, let me know. Here we have 2 babies, baby Nick, voiced by Nick DiPaolo, and baby Patrice, voiced by Patrice O'Neal. And these 2 would set the groundwork of what we were watching and getting into. They were often over at Nick's house with a babysitter, and we then get into the different shorts within each episode. Premiering on April 28th, 2004, the series would end up featuring several different comedian stories an episode, with some that would end up reoccurring throughout the series. But what made each episode a decent consistent watch was seeing how the series would bring each bit to life. The same art style was used for every story, which can definitely be a bit of a bummer and may have restricted what the show could do visually, but with that being said, I still didn't mind the art style used. It's the perfect early 2000s abstract look that has a big emphasis on being gross. Like, these dudes look gross. The way this guy's body morphs around looks gross, but there's a charm to it all. Now, the stories in general are just solid bits from all of these comedians, but here, in using them for the show, they would need to do something. They would need to elevate the material. By that I mean they need to genuinely add something to the visual story being painted by the comedian already. If it doesn't, then it's not adding anything to the bit other than a reference to visually explain what is being said. For the most part, it does a good job at this, taking the comedian's routine and building some ridiculous visuals that lend to it all. It didn't overshadow the bits either, which could easily happen, and overall I think it found a solid middle ground that worked well with the comedian's stand-up. Because it is a mix of comedians, not every single bit of comedy is going to land with you personally, so some of the stories aren't as interesting or even as funny as some of the others you'd find, and that's really going to come down to personal preference. That's the nature of a mixed bag beast like this. Now, the series didn't last that long, only running for one season with 13 episodes in total, which is a shame though, because it's honestly not that bad, but I just think it was maybe too early for the stuff that maybe would have helped it more. So like I said, animated clips from stuff like Dane Cook's routines would be circulated online. Specifically, I remember them on YouTube or Dailymotion, and not really knowing much at the time and just assumed that they were made by an online animator or even by Dane Cook's team themselves. I mean, there were countless other bits of Dane Cook's stand-up that was animated by random people online from around the early YouTube era, so it just made sense that it wouldn't be from anywhere but someone online. Now, with how the internet has gone and where YouTube is, you can find official releases where it would be the best of Dane Cook from Shorties Watchin' Shorties. A lot of networks would leverage their online platforms to promote and share clips of programs that would help a lot and become a bit of a standard for how things were being marketed. If Shorties Watchin' Shorties was around at a more modern time like this, I could see it easily thriving a lot more thanks to this technique. But that's all just an assumption of how I've seen it work for many other things since, as well as Comedy Central doing this retroactively in more recent years as a fun flashback to these shorts in the series from back then. For what it was, Shorties Watchin' Shorties was a fun concept that could have benefited from so many other things. Online promotion, maybe some other styles of art to change things up, but it sadly just didn't continue past the first season. For me, there was just a weird bit of nostalgia pulling me into the show more so than maybe most people, but I still in general do think it's a good concept, just maybe done so in the wrong era that would have helped it.
Unlocking a repressed memory.
Alright, now we are getting into the real deal here. Much like myself, I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of memories associated with a little show called Drawn Together. A show that would have what felt like off-brand versions of cartoon characters doing a lot of downright disgusting, awful, messed up, and unforgivable things. And it was kinda great, partly great. It was some level of great. Whatever the case, it somehow pulled you in and you couldn't look away. I mean, I was a kid checking out this show. Of course, the knockoff Pikachu and Superman and SpongeBob SquarePants were gonna bring my eyes to the show. There was also a little level of embarrassment watching the show, and I mean that in the sense of parents knowing you're watching it. Heck, I think if myself or my friends would watch, we would never acknowledge it. Drawn Together was such a great show at making me feel both uncomfortable and intrigued. Because of the association of the design of the characters and who they are parodying, it feels like an older generation would get a kick of how they are actually used in the show, and someone from my generation may be anywhere from confused to mortified at times. Like, imagine being a kid and flipping through the channels and finding something that looks and sounds like it could be similar to SpongeBob SquarePants doing something like this.
I'm not afraid to die!
Yeah, you'd be feeling weird about it, but you'd want to watch more. Drawn Together was created by Dave Jesser and Matt Silverstein, and followed several cartoon knockoffs that all share in their day-to-day lives while living in one house in a reality show-like style. And now they're all drawn together. Get it? Honestly, it's a pretty clever name, not gonna lie. There were 8 main characters here that were all based on other familiar characters, properties, and even inspiration from real-life people. There's Captain Hero, a Superman parody character, but he's anything but Superman. He's pretty awful, He's a giant pervert, he's pretty stupid, he's never really okay thanks to being emotionally unstable, and for me, personally, probably my least favorite character in the show, which is a testament to how awful he comes off. There's Ling Ling, who is basically just Pikachu who speaks in a blend of Japanese and Korean as subtitles pop up when Ling Ling speaks, and also Ling Ling has a thirst for blood that can be downright terrifying. There's Xander, who is basically supposed to be like Link from The Legend of Zelda or like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, as he's supposed to come off good looking and have a flamboyant personality, and also he's gay. So I'm sure he'll clash well with the next character, Princess Clara. She is based on Disney princesses and ends up being a character that flips the perception of what a princess would be or come off as in something like a Disney film. She's a God-fearing woman, she's a bigot, she's racist, and this was a bit inspired by the reality series The Real World, with the person on the show named Julie, who was known for being offensive every time they spoke. There's Spanky Ham, he's a pig, but he's based on a couple of different things, mainly early internet cartoons and the more crude and crass way they'd come off, as well as there was inspiration from someone on The Real World San Francisco, basing some likenesses off of the person named Puck. With Toot, we clearly have the influence of Betty Boop, but rather than being like how Betty Boop was portrayed and seen, Toot would be the complete opposite, often being joked on for being ugly or trashy and out of shape, and has a bit of a drinking problem, and overall, it's just kind of a big ball of drama. Her personality inspirations actually come from another person on a reality show as well, with that being Amy from Big Brother. Then of course, there is Woldor Sockbat, the SpongeBob SquarePants-like character who brings in that childlike wonder you'd find in a character like SpongeBob or Stimpy from Ren and Stimpy. You can see how his soul and spirit can easily be crushed with the messed up situations he gets himself in. Last but not least, there is Foxy Love, a character that is from the Hanna-Barbera mold of cartoons, and her character definitely made young me feel weird because she is voiced by Cree Summer, who at the time was voicing Number 5 in Codename Kids Next Door, and that's not including every other voice role she had, from Miranda and As Told by Ginger to Susie Carmichael in the Rugrats. So I knew her voice from all these other cartoons and kid shows, to then hearing her saying and doing so many promiscuous things on top of just her character design. Like, little old me was not okay. This wasn't okay. I mean, I know Tara Strong was voicing other characters in this show and had familiar voices that I can recognize throughout basically any cartoon you can think of, but something about hearing Cree's voice so distinctly between a kid show and an adult animated show definitely messed with my young brain. Now, with that overreaction being let out onto the internet, yeah, it's honestly fine, and her role in the series is pretty funny. Plot-wise, who really cares, right? The show didn't always care. Like, they were never really the point here. I won't outright say that there isn't legitimate stories or plot lines that do go on, but there was really nothing memorable coming from that aspect of the show outside of specific moments that get burned into your brain. Like in the episode The Lemonades Walk, where Spanky convinces Woldor to steal candy, and it ends with the mall security guard cornering him, and he goes from chill to crazy in milliseconds, as he grabs a random woman and threatens to end her if Woldor doesn't step away from the fountain ledge that he's on. He gives up and lets himself be caught, but the security guard still, well, you know. But what makes this scene memorable and honestly pretty incredible is the performance of the security guard, as he was voiced by the voice acting legend Billy West. And going from this chill speaking personality that you can watch instantly switch to this manic throat screeching burst of yelling is worthy of an award itself. And if you ever want to show anyone a clip from this show, this is the one that makes the show look as good as possible.
Step away, or the
Gets it! I'm not gonna say it again!
The big point of the show was just to make something that could be offensive or gross or messed up. All of the main characters are not good people. They all have their quirks that make them awful, and that's the point. There is no real moral compass here. All of them are just kind of bad people who do awful and disgusting things, and you find yourself asking, why does this kind of work? On paper, in theory, none of this should work. There's nothing to ground you in this world. There's no character who you can attach to who isn't just a terrible person. Yeah, some are way worse than others, but they are all not good, and you just get swept into all of the awful things they get into. Whether they are infighting amongst their group or out and about causing problems in public, they just get into all these degenerate situations. Now, with this being a parody of reality shows, I think playing into the trashy factor of why we sometimes, or most times if we're being honest, watch shows like that was a good decision. We cut out the morals and don't have to worry about things getting settled. You just get all of the trash and the drama along with the confessionals, which I believe is one of the most important factors of a reality show. There's no reason for this in-universe first reality show to even happen. It's just to bring these different characters together to be in the same location and live together. The reality show aspect really isn't that important. It's just the disguise on top of it all. Anything that the characters would get into would all lead back to what can become some sort of shock humor. Something to put on your screen to make you, well, shocked. No topic was off limits. If you think it'll be in the show, it most likely was. As time went on for the series, I do think it found more of its groove that it initially was trying to look for in the early episodes. It started as just being offensive at anything, as if you're throwing darts at a dartboard, but eventually it became more of a specific, unique blend the more they figured out what worked for the audience. It was apparent from the jump that they needed to find that groove a bit better because the pilot episode didn't get received particularly too well. One of the criticisms that did come in was that it didn't hit hard enough on the reality show side of things, and I do wish they found more of a use for this angle. And again, it really just kind of boiled down for a reason for them to all live together. The mixing of humor played into the darts on a dartboard type of offensive comedy, with the show having very messed up jokes with detailed animation to go with it, and also having toilet humor like basic fart jokes. It felt all over the place, and luckily, things in my opinion did get better with their focus, but in saying that, yeah, it was still all just very offensive. The show never pulled back the throttle on that. I totally get hating on this show. I also get why people liked it, and I also get where people come from when they say they still don't know how to feel about it other than they experienced it. Drawn Together ended up running for 3 seasons with a total of 36 episodes. But after the series came to an end in 2007, we ended up getting a straight-to-DVD movie 3 years later. The Drawn Together movie, The Movie, released on DVD April 20th, 2010, and what a great date too. Couldn't have picked a better date, honestly. The film ends up poking fun at being cancelled in favor of a different show, to which they are aiming the jokes at South Park. They also realize that they have no network restrictions, so they are able to do things without TV censorship. And this is way more plot heavy than any episode would ever be because, well, it's a movie. And there's lots of references and parallels to things in the media that you'd find today with certain world events, so going back and watching it 15 years later is pretty interesting to say the least. Overall, the film wasn't received all that well. The animation quality was a bit subpar compared to the series, and there was a lot of confusion about where the jokes were leaning, so in the end, it's not a great note to go out on for the series. Now that we know a bit about how things came to an end for the series, let's talk about the origins of the show itself.
It's adorable! What is it?
Drawn Together became a thing when both Dave and Matt were working as writers on the quickly canceled Fox sitcom Greg the Bunny, feeling mad that they were so constricted in the writer's room for what they could actually do, leading to one day where Matt had an epiphany come out of a fit of rage, and had the brilliant idea of an animated reality show. These two loved reality TV, hence the influence you see in the series, in both the style and in the characters themselves. So in coming up with the concept, they would call their agent, explain they can make an animated reality show with 8 different animated characters, and put them in one house together like a reality show, and they would be told, "That's the worst idea I've ever heard," with the agent explaining he can't sell that, whereas he could sell something like Clone High, which he was the agent for the people making that show. If you want to hear more about Clone High, check out my MTV animated video. So in having to back down from doing this idea for some time, it seemed like it was something that just probably wouldn't happen. But through random happenstance, a person by the name of Jordan Young reaches out to the pair about wanting to get into comedy writing. He was an animator working on The Simpsons and had a mutual friend with these two and wanted to reach out. They said that if he would design the characters for the concept of Drawn Together, that they can go and pitch it, and if it were to actually sell, they would then hire him on as a writer so that he can get into comedy writing, and wouldn't you know it, Jordan drew it, Dave and Matt sold it, and Jordan was hired on to develop and write for the show. Now, one of the best aspects of the show is the animation itself, thanks to a solid blending of different art styles we see from the different characters. They all feel picked up directly from the series or property or archetype that they are built from, and blended well when all interacting with one another. Production-wise, it was great to see such a level of effort being made to bring everything together. Going back and watching it now, I definitely have a larger appreciation for that fact alone. Going from that part of the production though to another, it seems that the creators found a solid home to work on the ideas they wanted to, unlike where they felt constricted before when working on stuff like Greg the Bunny. Sure, it still wasn't easy to get away with what they did in the show, but luckily, being on Comedy Central, they were granted a lot more leeway anyway compared to being on a network like Fox. With South Park helping really push what Comedy Central could do on TV, Drawn Together was able to mainly be the series Dave and Matt wanted it to be. They do state that of course there is pushback, there will always be constant arguing with the network, but they mentioned that Comedy Central didn't love having to censor them. They weren't in the business of wanting to stop their creative process, but more so out of necessity for very specific cases. But it's nice to know that there was good communication between the creatives and the network, and that they didn't hate each other. By the end of the show's run, they stated that they were able to make the series about 99% of how they envisioned it. When it came to the DVD side of things, they were surprised that they were able to make uncensored versions of what was on TV. There was a bunch of nudity and messed up stuff in the show, but underneath the censor bars and blurring was nothing. So when it came time to make the DVDs, they had to go back into the animation and actually add in all of that stuff they never even drew but censored out. As time went on, they were able to make stuff they knew would never make it to air anyway, just so it could be there for the DVD release. Like, they never showed this stuff to the network, they just made it and had it ready for the uncensored physical copies. Going back and watching Drawn Together today, you will probably find a mixed bag of appreciation and disgust. It truly pushed an envelope that you didn't even know was possible, and there is some interesting balancing of insanely offensive stuff that you'd probably never hear outside of that decade, while also finding how a lot of it is mocking the stupidity of the characters themselves, and the jokes being based on that these are bad people doing and saying bad things. You shouldn't like them. You should find it funny when bad things happen to them, and that you're in on that joke. Just like when sitting down to watch any reality show, especially with another person, you end up seeing characters say and do things that make you judge them. You get shocked at their decisions and you'll tune in next week for more of it. And then you get to discuss it with your friends or your partner or whoever, and it becomes like a little addictive tradition. And you just love it, and especially at the end of the season, for most shows where you get this big tell-all reunion and everyone starts fighting one another. It's great. In that way, Drawn Together may have crafted the perfect representation of a reality show in cartoon fashion. I would want to watch more. I would want to watch these characters get into the most ridiculous situations possible. I would want to watch to hear sentences and words I had never heard before that truly shocked me. Again, I was young, definitely too young for a show like this at the time. A lot of stuff I never knew or heard before came from Drawn Together. Maybe that's why I'm so drawn to it as a big core memory for me. Drawn Together isn't some Shakespearean level of entertainment, it's honestly far from it, but it was well animated, a bit of a wild ride to experience, and one of the original reasons why I would even start watching Comedy Central in general. Now, I do think you outgrow a series like this as you get older. You can still appreciate some aspects of it and even enjoy parts of it, but it definitely doesn't hit today like it did back when I was younger. I know Drawn Together is hit or miss for a lot of people, so you let me know in the comments down below where you're standing with this one.
Step right up, ladies and gentlemen.
Continuing on, the next animated show from Comedy Central would be John Benjamin and David Cross's Freak Show, a series about a group of interesting people you'd see at a carnival under the attraction name of Freak Show. But beyond their interesting features, here they are also a team of superheroes. Now, we mentioned John Benjamin before when speaking about our first show in this video, but here he is back working alongside comedian David Cross as creators of this series. They also both voice the main character, or should I say characters, as they play Benny and Tuck, a pair of conjoined twins who operate as the leader of their superhero team. I use the term superhero lightly. They're not the ones you call to save the day. They're the ones you call for the small, nonsensical jobs. This team would be used for what feels more like chores that they are tasked with rather than anything remotely heroic. Like, sure, they do get put into dangerous situations, but the task they are sent in to do is something like taking out a billboard that badmouths the president, or go to an island to source the president's favorite type of nuts, or even being tasked with going and tampering with the mileage of the president's plane. Sounds like they are just the president's personal fixers. But regardless of that, they are all a group of unique individuals. Their designs and powers end up mainly playing out in the style of gross out humor, with some of them being more visually disgusting than others. First, like I mentioned, there is Benny and Tuck. They are conjoined twins, but they do have the ability to separate from one another, and they mostly just end up not wanting to be separated. Unless like in episode 4 when they get into a disagreement with one another and separate for a period of time. There's the bearded clam, who is just this amalgamation of several different messed up things that first start off normal for what you would see at a carnival's freak show, like her being a bearded woman. But then it spirals and goes completely bonkers with her also being this melted blob that is also a clam. Her backstory and personality are also wild, with who raised her and her being an anarchist adds a whole nother layer to who she is, and oh my, her powers? Well, she can shoot out these specific acidic juices, but she can also do something else, and I'll get into that in a moment. that. Then there's Preemie, who is literally a premature baby who has the powers of what a baby would have anyway, like vomiting, but like in a targeted way. He also is in this tube contraption that keeps him from the outside world and, well, vice versa. There's the log cabin Republican whose powers are that he is gay and can transform his look from this to this and having more bear-like abilities in combat. Lastly, there's the world's tallest Nebraskan, who can do the most incredible thing of all, and that's being able to shrink his size by 6 inches. Yeah, their powers aren't really anything all that special, nor most times helpful, and that's kind of the point. They don't really have the cool superheroes' powers. They have powers and abilities just as odd as they are. There is one thing they can do though, and that's have a signature combination ability, much like something in the Power Rangers or Voltron. Stuff like that, where they all stack on top of each other with the bearded clam melting her body into a liquid state, engulfing all of them until they fuse into what looks like a conventionally good-looking hero with long flowing blonde hair, and the horrifying faces of everyone fused into this throughout his body. Now, while they do end up on dangerous missions because of their simple prime objectives, they always get overshadowed by the Justice Squad, who are the real big and famous team of superheroes that get all the limelight and credit. Outside of that, they do have some stuff to deal with back at their carnival, where they are trying to defend their freak show from being bought up and commercialized by big freak show business, which apparently is a thing, as Mr. Scheist of the evil Freakmark Corporation wants Mr. Hartsdale's freak show out of the way. It's silly, it's dumb, but it's all kind of fun. That's the best way to describe the show. It's nothing that I'd say is great and a must-see, but it genuinely is pretty funny throughout its 7-episode run. It premiered on October 4th, 2006, and yeah, unfortunately, the series was canceled after the first season, ending its run by mid-November of the same year, as it would then become pretty obscure, but honestly, I'd recommend checking at least an episode or two of it out. I think the voice acting work and how all of the characters interact with one another is one of the strongest selling points that makes the show a lot more fun. You'll even hear some other familiar voices pop up in the show, like Will Arnett, Fred Armisen, Kristen Schaal, Elijah Wood, and of course Bob Odenkirk.
Try to keep up! Why, you disrespectful little—
The show definitely fits into the era it's from, having a lot of messed up jokes and pretty unpleasant visuals to mainly shock you as a viewer. The comedy in it and how dialogue is delivered truly make it worth sitting through, and if you find yourself feeling like this series feels more like an Adult Swim type of show, well, Radical Axis were the ones behind the production, and they are responsible for a lot of programs that you'd see on Adult Swim. And with the style of freak show, especially with the character of the bearded clam, it ends up giving you the feeling of Squidbillies, which was another production from Radical Axis. I am sure I will talk more about them in an Adult Swim video at some point, but for now, that's Freak Show. It intentionally may be hard to look at, but there is a bit of a hidden gem here for other aspects that I enjoyed. While the series has its flaws and can be a bit dated, Freak Show isn't the worst experience I feared it would be when going back to check it out. It was mostly a pleasant surprise, and maybe you'd enjoyed it if you went and checked it out.
What the— Somehow I got my tater tots!
It's about time that the political aspect of some of this era's cartoons came out from just being hidden, or not so hidden, in the bushes through jokes, references, and satire, but instead, now just put all out there on full display. Lil Bush would be the next Comedy Central animated series where here, they would put a caricature of the president at the time front and center and say, yes, we are directly making fun of him. Premiering in June of 2007, Lil Bush followed the adventures of the Bush administration, but not in the White House, as this is told through this alternate version of what's going on with the world in the time of what would have been George W. Bush's presidency, but shown through the lens of him now being a kid who goes to school with all of these other representations of those who would be around him in real life at the White House. You got Lil Georgie, Lil Cheney, Lil Al Gore, Lil Hillary, Lil Obama, and you get it, right? The show takes all these aspects of this era of politics and just pokes fun at it. It's really not deeper than that. In this world of the show, it's the other George Bush, you know, the one with an H instead of a W, who's president again for whatever reason, and it's only an excuse so that they can have everyone aged down to be in elementary school, but still have these weird adult-faced caricatures to them. The only impressive thing about the show is that it somehow lasted for 2 seasons. I know I am coming across a little harsh here, but the show offers you as the viewer nothing. It's surface-level comedy and some random musical numbers. The jib-jabs about Bush from that time already did that, and in a more effective way. If you wanted to go this more in-your-face route with the series? Why not just have Bush and associates just be represented in these kid forms, but actually in the White House and having to deal with everything? The way the series goes about a lot of things just doesn't make sense, and you're left with nothing all that interesting. Honestly, the biggest problem with the series isn't the fact that it's just way too on the nose with its commentary about the president and the politics from its time, it's the fact that it's from its time. Even if there were things that made it redeeming to watch, it is so dated that it's a struggle to go back and sit through. And even for its time though, it was already starting to get dated because what it was mocking or satirizing was usually stuff from earlier in Bush's presidency. As the show was coming out closer to the end of that, it felt too late then and it feels boring and unwatchable now. There's a lot of stuff that will just sound like stuff you've heard before and reheated for the purpose of the show. Yeah, it's fine to poke fun at politics, and a lot of what you'll hear is stuff that makes sense to call out, make fun of, or even still feel some type of way about today, but in the context of the show, it just ends up feeling surface level and shallow. Because it is blatantly just, here's the president and the people around him dealing with world events, it only ever feels like the show treats the audience like you're getting read a picture book, and they point at the pictures going, look at this moment that once happened. That's something to talk about, right? When you're on the same network that already has shows like The Colbert Report or The Daily Show, a cartoon like Lil Bush feels so underbaked and hits all the lowest hanging fruit possible, rather than trying to say something or truly explore why it is trying to be satirical. There really aren't any redeeming qualities here. The show itself doesn't offer you a solid reason to rewatch it or to go back and check it out for the first time. What's more interesting than the show itself is how it started, and that's thanks to being this little series on Amped Mobile's service for cell phones. While that service didn't end up lasting long, Lil Bush the web series was able to be taken by Comedy Central as a full-on series now, and then we got what we got. A too little, too late, too shallow, too boring series that, despite all these political news outlets loving for whatever reason, was really a show that should have ended when Amped Mobile ended. Like, Lil Bush was talked about as this historical thing because it became the first example of a series that started on a cell phone, went on to YouTube, and then was picked up as a show on TV. And I don't know, that just feels weird for some reason. Lil Bush didn't really have anything to say, and I'm honestly surprised it even lasted for as long as it did. This is by far the worst animated offering from the animated side of Comedy Central so far in this video. But there may be a couple other things worse yet to come. Stay tuned.
This camp sucks.
Futurama needs no introduction. It's one of, if not my favorite adult animated shows. If you're wondering why I am even talking about it now for this video, well, that's because Comedy Central does have a role to play in Futurama's history. Historically, Futurama has been canceled and picked back up a few times, for better or for worse depending on how you feel about that. Originally, Matt Groening created the series for Fox, and the first 4 seasons of the show were there before ultimately being canceled, and then the show became a syndicated rerun darling on Adult Swim. Now, when I say canceled, it was more like a keep quiet and not ordering more episodes to be made type of thing, as Matt believes that some Fox executives were not supporters of the show. So the series was just dropped from the lineup and there was no more production to be had. From there though, Futurama started finding some success alongside another show that basically had the same fate happen to it around the same time and from the same network, and that would be a little show called Family Guy, and maybe you've heard of it. And through this, and specifically through the physical media market in which I am a product of, there was hope yet that Futurama can come back thanks to this success. But it wouldn't necessarily be a show. Instead, it was going to be a series of 4 straight-to-DVD releases that, thanks to Comedy Central, would be cut up and released as a season's worth of episodes. Fox wanted to, of course, tackle more of the DVD market, so if you wanted more Futurama, you could buy it as these individual movies: Bender's Big Score, The Beast with a Billion Backs, Bender's Game, and Into the Wild Green Yonder. Comedy Central would start premiering this now cobbled-together Season 5 on TV, at least giving those who didn't know about it or buy the movies a chance to have a technical new season of the show, even if it wasn't a new season. Into the Wild Green Yonder was made to be a way to end the series, as who knew at the time if they were going to get another shot and make more episodes or more movies in general. As Comedy Central and 20th Century Fox had all of their agreements in order, it was now official. A brand new 6th season of the show was officially in the works, and it would come out in the summer of 2010. This was a pretty exciting moment. Getting the 4 movies was pretty cool in general, but to officially have the show back had me extremely excited. excited. From this moment, we were able to get 2 full brand new seasons of Futurama, 26 episodes each. And it's not surprising that it was exactly what it needed to be, more Futurama. And getting a chance to have more adventures with the Planet Express crew was awesome, and there was a continued focus throughout regarding Fry and Leela's feelings for one another, which I enjoyed, especially for how these seasons would come to an end. The 6th season premiered on June 24th, 2010, and it resulted in Comedy Central's biggest night on their network at the time for ratings, both in the way of a Thursday primetime showing and in general for any other night in 2010. It was fair to say that Futurama was back, and people tuned in. Partway through this season, the series would be renewed for the 7th season, which would come out in the summer of 2012. Because of the nature of the original way the series came to an end with season 4, and them not being sure that anything would come after the movies and even after season 6 before the 7th season would happen, the show would end up having at this point 4 official endings in a way. You have season 4's episode The Devil Hands Are Idle Playthings, the movie Into the Wild Green Yonder, season 6's episode Overclockwise, and then the final episode of season 7, Meanwhile. All have received differing opinions, and each of them offer some possible open-ended scenarios to have a good moment to end on, while also holding open the door for more in the future. Contrasting the endings of season 6 and 7, they both work well for what they were going for, but for me, one is more impactful and more important. And the season 6 ending isn't the finale, by the way. That instead goes to the next episode titled Reincarnation, and was just a fun finale to that season that featured other styles of animation with 3 different segments, but in canon, the episode Overclockwise was written as the finale. In that episode, we get a pretty open-ended look into the future, to see what is in store for the characters of Fry and Leela more specifically, since their relationship is a big part of the core heart of the series, giving us a chance to see them getting a look into their future and us a view of their reactions, making you feel that there is so much more to come, but if we never get to see it, we still have some reassurances of it being happy in the end. It's a nice way to ambiguously sunset the series if they didn't come back again. But the 7th season did happen, and this time, the ending would be so much more of a pull on the heartstrings. Obviously, and I'll get to it, the series would come back after this, but even then, spoiling in detail the ending of the 7th season hurts me physically. So all I'll say is that what it does for the relationship of Fry and Leela and the big decision they end up making really cements it as the best way the show could have wrapped things up and still kept it slightly open. Futurama has always been such a chill comfort show for me personally, and the fact that it never seems to really die has made me both a happy fan, but one who is a bit cautious because I don't think a show necessarily has to run forever and ever. Things are allowed to come to an end at some point, as well as my personal bias here of how much I love the ending to season 7, and wanting that to be the finite ending. Now that Futurama has come back with another revival thanks to Hulu, we ended up receiving 20 new episodes that would make up seasons 8 and 9 of the series. And if that's not the best example of these weird small season mandates or splitting a season into multiple, then I don't know what is. Did you see the 2nd season of Squid Game? Squid Game? That isn't a full season. They just cut it at a major moment and said, hey, season 3's coming right around the corner. What happened to the world, man? We used to be better than this. As of now, Futurama has been renewed for another 20 episodes through Hulu that will end up being the 10th and 11th season, and while I am always looking forward to more Futurama always, some of these newer episodes have been hit or miss. And there have been plenty of discussions of this out there, but I'm mainly here to talk about the Comedy Central side of things. Honestly, I could talk about Futurama in complete detail for hours and hours and hours, and maybe that's a video for another time, but I still felt that bringing it up here for a bit was important because of Comedy Central playing such a big hand in getting the series to initially come back and made it possible for the show to create my favorite ending to it. I wanted to keep this all brief because it's really all about the couple seasons and the story around it rather than Futurama in detail, so if you want more Futurama from me in the future, let me know, and if you don't let me know, I will subject you to one of the saddest pieces of any media ever made, and that's the Jurassic Bark episode of Futurama. Just kidding, I'd never do that to you. At least not yet.
That's what they call a dirty Houdini. Let's be careful down there.
The next original animated Comedy Central production is the series Ugly Americans that follows the character of Max working as a social worker in New York City. But this isn't your average New York City. This is a version of it where the world is shared between humans and a bunch of different monsters, creatures, demons, and more. Premiering in March of 2010, Ugly Americans was created by Devin Clark and developed by Simpsons writer David M. Stern, who is important to note here in the case of the origins of the show and what it originally stems from. As we follow Mark, we get to see how he has to work with these different creatures to help them with what they're going through, as well as helping them integrate with society in general, as it is this mixed bag of humans and all of these various types of creatures. From the initial look of the show and all of the creative designs, there was a lot of promise here for something that could be pretty good. So before we would get Ugly Americans, there was a little web series that went by the name of 5 On with Alan Whiter, and it was directed and even animated by Devin Clark. This web series started coming out online in June of 2007 on Comedy Central's website, and at that time had a few names writing it that would end up all making larger and larger names for themselves, with them being John Mulaney, Pete Holmes, and Nick Kroll. The concept of the web series would be these interview segments for the news that featured conversations with creatures and monsters and their opinions on current social topics. So from here, the concept of the world being as it is, but now having all of these other interesting creatures in it, would be the main influence when David took notice and wanted to develop the series into something more fleshed out, and thus we ended up with Ugly Americans, keeping the same base world concept, just now it's not through the lens of a news interview. The main show itself, though, does stand on its own thanks to my favorite aspect, and that is the world building, or maybe I should just say the world viewing. Yeah, that might be a better term here, because this world that they have built is genuinely interesting. Not only are all of the character designs of the demons, creatures, monsters, etc. all unique and varied, the city and the depths below and other locations are so fleshed out that it makes it truly feel lived in. There's always stuff going on around our main cast of characters in the city, almost to an overwhelming degree, but I really feel that's what makes it believable and works so well. You take a city like New York that is constant hustle and bustle with so much already going on, and now you feel that partially with all these creatures doing, well, whatever. It's chaotic in the best ways possible. And while I like some of the characters in the show, I do sadly think a lot of what we do focus on is not as interesting because of feeling distracted by what else could be going on in this world. Now, I get it. There is something that on paper works, having your vessel into this world be Mark, who for all intents and purposes is so bland. Putting him in the driver's seat to contrast everything around him helps emphasize the craziness of it all. He's just so uninteresting though, at least for me, and I think that's mainly due to him being so grounded as the good guy. He cares about his job and he wants to be helpful, while everything and mostly everyone else around him tears him down. I think I just feel bad for him and exhausted from what he has to deal with and go through. The side characters definitely add a lot more to the series. His zombie roommate Randall is pretty great, often being the source of the best moments or biggest laughs from the series. Mark does have a relationship in the show going on and off again with this demon succubus named Callie, and while it adds an interesting dynamic because of their differences, it comes off as more of a way to just have her character get mad or yell, and it gets less and less interesting the more it happens. You have characters like Twain, who is the Department of Integration's director, who could care less about the actual integration work being done, as well as Officer Grimes, who is the head of the law enforcement division in the Department of Integration, who is all in on being against anyone who isn't a human, and even more so for those integrating through illegal ways. They both add in a bunch of context to understand how those in this mixed world view each other, while adding in some social commentary, doing so through extremes to then emphasize someone like Mark's character. But again, there is so much to this world that comes off so much more interesting that we don't explore. It's nice to get bits of lore about this world and how stuff like the zombies are seen or how the demons view the humans and so on, but I feel as a viewer you just get left starved. We get so many little breadcrumbs without getting the full loaf. And that's okay too, in the sense of you can't really explore everything out there. You do need some path to keep things in line, but I just always felt like it was missing something a tad bit more. Like, it interests me that there are also wizards in this world like Leonard, who works alongside Mark, but really doesn't work, you know? But he makes up for that with his extensive knowledge to share when it comes to all of the different creatures that coexist in this world. Maybe if the show was able to have run for a longer period of time, a lot more might have been able to be fleshed out. Sadly, the series didn't get that chance. In the end, after its 2-season run with 31 episodes, the series would be canceled, but in a weird way, where the network tried to help keep it going, but sadly, they couldn't get things figured out for the show's financing. Devin Clark ended up putting out a post on Tumblr that read, "Ugly American fans, as you might have gathered by now, Comedy Central did not renew us for a 3rd season. The reason this notice is coming so late is that, in spite of lukewarm ratings, the network did everything in their power to keep the show alive by trying to find outside funding. We came very close, but unfortunately some legal technicalities kept any deals from going through. We are exploring other options, even ones that don't include traditional TV episodes, such as original web shorts or even a graphic novel. We love this universe and the characters, and we want to keep them alive, or undead, for you in any way we can. We, the producers, would continue to make the show without a paycheck to ourselves, but unfortunately, animation and all the aspects of TV production are rather expensive. We appreciate appreciate your steadfast loyalty to our little show. We will continue to update this page with any news we have about Ugly Americans, along with new projects of interest from the writers, producers, animators, and cast. Yours in ugliness, the producers of Ugly Americans. Continuing on with a note just from Devin saying, yes, sadly, it's official. Ugly Americans is not coming back anytime soon. I am sorry we can't make more episodes for you guys. I want to thank all the Ugly fans for their support and for all the awesome fan art. Keep it up, who knows? Maybe we can kickstart something Ugly in the future. A movie, a graphic novel. The other producers and I are working hard to find a new home for Mark, Randall, Callie, Twain, Leonard, and Grimes. And Koala Man, of course. There was definitely a supportive enough fan base for the series that wanted to see more from the world of Ugly Americans. Doing something like making web shorts would have been cool to see because it would be going back to its roots. Now what would happen would be the series coming back in a way through the format and medium of a video game. Not this video game though. Ugly Americans Apocalypse-ageddon came out during the run of the show back in 2011 for the Xbox 360 and PS3. It was a poorly reviewed twin-stick shooter. I can't say that I ever played it, but what I also didn't play was the newer video game, which plays out like an interactive story where you choose responses and speak to other characters. Ugly American's new format was released in September of 2014 as an iOS game, and started off by making a joke about a 2-year unpaid vacation and then jumping back into things with Mark. Devin stated that, "We had such a blast creating this world and these characters for the TV show. It has been a real pleasure revisiting them in this new format. Also, maybe now I won't have to live in a cardboard box on the street." As of now, this was the end of Ugly Americans, and while not being something that I truly loved but thought was okay, I still had fun with, and hope that maybe one day they are able to do some more with it through web shorts. But that's just my personal viewpoint. A graphic novel would be pretty cool too. Either way, I do think there were some cool aspects of the show, but nothing super special enough that got me hooked to want to watch more of it, aside from the character designs and the look of the world itself.
Never try this at home, kid.
I'm not afraid of you anymore. I'm a bear.
Oh, I can't believe it's time. It's time to talk about Brickleberry. I actually have to talk about it, huh? Alright, well let's talk about it then, shall we? Brickleberry, Comedy Central's 2012 adult animated series that follows the adventures of some park rangers at a national park. Created by Roger Black and Waco Ogwin, the series followed the same type of style you'd see with so many adult animated series post Family Guy, and that's just trying to figure out how to make Family Guy, but maybe worse? Oftentimes taking all of the wrong things to emphasize and going far into the shock value side of things, believing that you need to be more wild, more grotesque, more offensive, and what you get left with is a show that has no identity. It only serves to get your attention and offer you nothing. Unless you count being remembered for being a not-so-great show that people dread discussing as an identity, then yeah, there's really nothing here. It did have quite the journey though to being made into a full-on series. Fox wanted it, but then they didn't want it. It was really weird. In 2007, the show was pitched around and Fox ended up ordering a pilot of it, telling the creators to go all out and not hold back. But when delivering it to the network, they said, "There's no way this can go on our network," thinking the show was just too offensive. It's like ordering a cheeseburger and being disappointed that there's cheese on your cheeseburger. You ordered the cheeseburger. In fact, you ordered extra cheese on your cheeseburger. Why are you mad? Fox ended up passing on the series as a whole, leaving the creators to work with their agent who got them in contact with the comedian Daniel Tosh. Then as time would go on, Daniel's show on Comedy Central, Tosh.0, was crushing it in the ratings, becoming the network's top show. So with Daniel looking to dip his feet into the creative pool of producing other productions, Brickleberry became that vessel and having everything on the creator's side, and as they put it, having the #1 guy on the network with the #1 show with a really good pilot with lots of ideas, Comedy Central ended up not wanting to pick up their series either. They were interested in seeing another pilot, but the creators weren't into that, so they walked away for now. And there was a brief moment after this where they would all bring Brickleberry to Adult Swim, and a 10-episode deal was nearly struck. However, Comedy Central came back and wanted to create Brickleberry with 10 episodes as well, but on the condition of having Daniel not just be an executive producer on it, but also voice a main character of the series. Daniel would joke about this, but honestly, there was some underlying truth about the whole process behind the scenes, saying saying that he only wanted to write and produce, and that Comedy Central wouldn't pick it up unless he got in the voice acting booth and essentially gave them a better way to help sell the show to audiences so they tune in. So from there, Brickleberry would become a show and begin production, first premiering in late September of 2012. Now we get to the show itself, as we get to meet all of the personalities of the park rangers, and I really just don't find any of them likable. There is the true main character of Steve, a proud park ranger who truly displays nothing that warrants him being a Ranger of the Month every month, but he cares deeply about that title like he's SpongeBob SquarePants or something. Speaking of SpongeBob, Tom Kenny voices a character in the show as well, that being Woody, but I'll get to him. Steve is supposed to be the lovable idiot, right? He's not the most fit, he's not the smartest, but he sure is a park ranger, I guess, at least in title. This dynamic is contrasted with Ethel, who is a good, well, better ranger. She for sure has her own level of issues to deal with throughout the series. She comes in as someone who can do things way better than someone like Steve, as well as being in better shape and becomes someone who Steve views as both a threat to his great, I say that in air quotes, work as a park ranger and as someone he has feelings for. It's one of those things, a twofer kinda, if you will. Going back to Woody, he's the boss or head of the park ranger troop here, and he's a lot to handle thanks to his militant behavior and the awful point of views that he carries. While he ends up being a character with a lot to explore throughout the series, I don't think there's a moment where the way you see him truly changes. At least for me, he's definitely not my favorite character in the show by any stretch of the imagination. There are also two other rangers in the series, with them being Denzel and Connie. There's not much to say about either of them because they both end up, more so than the other characters, just being repetitive joke setup in punching bags. Denzel keeps going through the same bits and wants to be with older women, and Connie falls into the masculine lesbian trope of being voiced by a man. And it's actually Roger Black himself voicing her. And all of the jokes are constantly at the expense of her looks, her voice, her aggressive admiration of Ethel, and it just keeps going through them over and over again. It's all that these characters truly have going for them in the series. This reheating joke cycle is constant and tiring. Now last, but definitely not least, because the show wouldn't be a thing without him, is Malloy, a talking little bear voiced by Daniel Tosh. Also, I just reminded myself of the show Little Bear. Now that's a feel-good show. And what about Franklin? Man, turtles are cool. Good times. Anyway, enough of these forest animals and back to this forest animal, as he is definitely a highlight of the series, and maybe Comedy Central here made the right call in having Daniel voice the character. While it is just Daniel's voice, he does have the perfect level of sass and line delivery skills to make the character at least fun. While he is on par with all the other messed up stuff said and done by the others, Malloy adds another dynamic that made the show slightly more enjoyable. Yeah, it is a silly aspect of the series, but every adult animated show has some form of talking animal character, and here it does kind of feel shoehorned in a bit for the sake of having Daniel involved in the voice acting side of things, but it just works. He's a menace, and I appreciate his rude demeanor towards the other park rangers most of the time. I get it, man. I don't like any of them either. Brickleberry really ends up being a show that feels like bits and pieces from other shows with characters that don't really have much more going for them other than their own one or two note personality traits. There could be shows where you're not supposed to like characters, like draw them together, but there's a bit of a point to that, where here you have something like the lovable idiot main lead who never really comes off as lovable, because I sure don't love him. Now, that's not to say that there weren't some moments in the series that I found funny or enjoyed, but they are so far and few between and mostly featured Malloy that I can't really say that the series has anything here for me to genuinely enjoy it. But hey, not everyone can get a show made in the first place, and sometimes they turn out to just not be for everybody. But I do think it's cool that Roger and Waco were still able to get the series made in general. For the creators, getting the show made felt to them like hitting the lottery, as they have noted in an interview with Animation World Network. Waco's father-in-law is a retired park ranger, and thanks to an incident between his father-in-law and Roger during Waco's wedding, the ridiculousness of a park ranger taking their job too seriously, or later as we would see in the series, unseriously, sparked from there as they found it really funny. And if seeing Roger rings any sort of bells for you, well, maybe you know him for his time on the Howard Stern Show as Yucko the Clown. And then the duo who met and started working in sketch comedy together in 1999 at the University of Georgia would end up having this small sketch comedy show called Stankervision, which released on MTV2. But when that was over, they circled back to this park ranger idea, initially thinking that Brickleberry could be this live-action series, but the costs would be too high, leading to them focusing on turning to animation for the series. While I may not be the biggest fan of Brickleberry, I am a fan of seeing how the process works for a lot of people when trying to make a series, animated or not. Comedy is subjective, so just because I didn't love it doesn't mean that everyone won't either. I mean, heck, Brickleberry ended up running for 3 seasons with a total of 36 episodes before finishing off in April of 2015. Even after the series was canceled, there was still more Brickleberry to come, come. Firstly, the series received a 4-issue comic the following year in 2016, where they just take the characters on more bizarre adventures. Definitely not as bizarre as these dudes' adventures, but that's a given. I just promised my girlfriend that I'd mention JoJo's in this video at some point. After this, Roger and Waco created their next series for Netflix called Paradise PD, where the show ends up taking place in the same universe as Brickleberry with several connections both on screen and behind the scenes. In March of 2020, everyone's favorite month from their favorite year thanks to, well, you know, the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, Brickleberry would make a bit of a return through Netflix thanks to Paradise PD, with an episode of the series titled Paradise PD Meets Brickleberry. So if you like Brickleberry or even Paradise PD, I think that's pretty fun, but overall for me, Brickleberry doesn't hit any solid notes that kept me interested. A lot of the jokes became too self-referential and repeated. The shock humor wasn't shocking enough to really be a selling point of, oh, you won't believe what happened, you gotta see this, as it came off in the opposite effect of becoming expected and boring. And lastly, the art style really isn't for me. I don't love the look of the show one bit. Again, that's just me, and I am happy for you if you feel different. At least the look of the logo of the series reminds me of better and more pleasant things, specifically Stardew Valley for whatever reason. Whew, maybe I just need to step away and go relax by playing that game. I need to heal my soul.
It'll stink of blood and there will be flies everywhere.
While the creators of Brickleberry may have started in sketch comedy, our next show puts the sketch in sketch comedy. Thank you. I appreciate you, thank you. TripTank is Comedy Central's animation amalgamation that fills up each episode with multiple animated sketches from various creators, all with different animation styles. Much like MTV's Liquid Television or MTV's Cartoon Sushi, TripTank focused on bringing in all of these different types of shorts that end up varying in quality. Some are definitely really impressive and memorable, while others, well, you may regret watching. Now, if you saw my animated MTV show video, you know I love shows like this. Getting to see a showcase of a bunch of different cartoons from a bunch of different creators is always a fun time. The main difference you'll see here compared to what was on MTV is that TripTank would feature a lot more shorts that tried to be under the gross out and degenerate category, which doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but you can tell which shorts had more focus and which shorts felt like it just wanted you to gasp at it. I'm not saying that on MTV we didn't have gross out and degenerate stuff there, but this feels more like it was inspired by stuff like Liquid Television or Cartoon Sushi, adding on the fact of internet animators taking rise throughout the 2000s and into the 2010s, resulting in TripTank feeling like a little bit of all of that. I mean, visually, it is a mixed bag, and it could be pretty fun blending in all of these different styles together as they run back to back to back every episode. TripTank premiered in April of 2014 and would end up lasting for a total of 2 seasons with 28 episodes. And while I don't think it hits the highs of the shows that came before it, it does have its own charm. There are some really fun and really well animated shorts in here that definitely are worth the watch alone. But in that same breath, you wouldn't be missing all that much if you didn't check out the series, and maybe you'd enjoy just checking out one-off shorts here and there online rather than watching a full episode of the series, but that's up to you. There is an impressive list of voice actors who lend their voices here, and it's fun noticing them as they do pop up. And in general, shout out to all the animators both big and small, from the industry and from the internet, getting involved in something like this, which I think is just flat out cool. Now, sometimes because of having so many ideas thrown out there in shows like these, we do end up seeing something materialize out of it and into its own program. That ends up being the case here too, with Jeff and Some Aliens, a reoccurring segment about aliens going and studying a guy named Jeff, who is painfully average, and using him as a baseline for the judgment of the human race. Following TripTank's cancellation after 2 seasons in 2016, 2017 would see the release of a more full-fledged version of Jeff and Some Aliens. We will be talking about it in this video a small bit later because of going in the proper order, but I just think it's cool to see something spawn from shows like this. There really isn't anything else left to say about TripTank. All I can say is that I did have some fun with it, and I appreciate it. That's about it.
TripTank.
I'm getting a soda. Would you like anything? No, never mind. I don't want a double fist.
Moonbeam City is an odd one. It came out at a weird time where I felt we started to see a larger transition of the general Hollywood actor now getting into being a voice actor. That's not to say that the actors involved in the show haven't done voice acting before, or that they weren't good at it. I'm just saying in a traditional sense, there was a pretty big shift happening, and it became more and more about selling some form of entertainment, in this case a show, based on the names attached to it. Here we have 2015 slightly star-studded Moonbeam Moonbeam City, banking on advertising who was in the show with Rob Lowe, Will Forte, Kate Mara, and Elizabeth Banks. I mean, if those names aren't hitting as hard today, they sure were a decade ago. Rob Lowe was just having Parks and Rec come to an end. Will Forte, aside from having a voice acting role in every animated series you can ever think of out there on the planet, was just starting his lead role in the show The Last Man on Earth. Kate Mara not only recently at this time had a decent-sized role to play in part of House of Cards, but would also play Sue Storm in 2015's Fantastic Four. Sorry, Four Stick. Hey, it's not her fault the movie came out the way it did, okay? And Elizabeth Banks was both in her starring in quirky roles era, like with The Hunger Games, as well as in her directing era with stuff like the Pitch Perfect movies, which she was also in. As we know more and more today is that star power, and even more so today, follower counts matter to the production.
But just so you know, if you have over this many followers, you can get the movie funded. Producers, they hand me a sheet with the amount of collective followers I have to get of the cast that I cast. It's confusing.
While I understand why a studio or someone like a casting director would want to focus on namesake and numbers, there is still a production that matters at the end of the day. You can put all the stuff you like on a sandwich, but will it taste good? I know these are more dramatic examples of more stuff happening 10 years post a show like Moonbeam City, but I think it kind of highlights the dramatic escalation of things. Created by Scott Gardner, who is mainly known for this YouTube video here.
I'm not like these people, okay? This is an extortion plot by my ex-wife.
Moonbeam City was built as a love letter to the neon-soaked futurism designs of the 80s, blending in the vibes of buddy cop detective films, TV shows, anime, and manga. Here we follow the main character of Dazzle Novak, voiced by Rob Lowe. He is a detective who, and stop me if you've heard this before, is not great at their job, but is egotistical and more focused on the ladies. It's a character design model that we have seen a few times before, with a few small tweaks here and there. But what makes Dazzle work so well, though, is both the line delivery from Rob Lowe, and that as a character, he's just not smart, he's not focused, but here he is as a detective. The only character that outdoes his stupidness is his rival Rad, voiced by Will Forte, who ends up making Dazzle not look as bad in the grand scheme of things. They both end up being this level of lovably dumb, though, so they are just idiots that try and drain every bit of soul you have while watching, but I think their dynamic along with their performances work really well together. In addition to them is Chrysalis, voiced by Kate Mara, who is the responsible and smarter rookie who ends up having to deal with all of the mess that comes from working alongside Dazzle, and by that extent, Rad. She definitely grounds the wackiness going on, but still is a fun character that gets to have some fun in the mix of things. Then of course is their boss, the police chief Pizzazz, voiced by Elizabeth Banks, who has to deal with the messes made by Dazzle's not so great work, and you kind of understand why he is still around thanks to their feelings for one another that come into play. Throughout the series, you can see how it plays up being in this neon 80s inspired world, taking designs and caricatures right out of that time period. Having people like the mayor, who is seen as this overly evil person with bad intentions that holds a position of power, or well-dressed and pompous villains that aren't too big of a threat at the end of the day. Heck, there's even a hip new synthetic drug and even virtual reality that you can get trapped in. It doesn't get more 80s than that. For me, however, it really boils down to the art style and color palette used to make the show literally pop visually. Aside from the vivid colors used, the series would end up taking inspiration from famous artist Patrick Nagel, who created a very distinct style of art throughout his life, with his most famous and influential being labeled as the Nagel Women, or in a singular sense, the Nagel Woman. The look and style of these pieces became insanely influential and really played into the aesthetics of the late 70s and the start of the 80s. This truly connected with this futuristic 80s synthwave feel, thanks to stuff like Patrick doing the cover art for Duran Duran's 1982 album, Rio. I think the art style of the show really connects with me personally because of genuinely liking Patrick's work. I do actually own this Patrick Nagel image, as it's one of my favorite pieces from him, so the look of the show I find extremely pleasant to view. I actually took this down off my wall, I should go put it back. From the design work of the characters to the look of the world, Moonbeam City really nails all of this so well, and I appreciate the level of detail in it all. Sadly though, the series would end up only lasting one season long, with a total of 10 episodes before being cancelled, which I do understand. The reviews overall weren't too kind to it, mainly comparing it to Archer, or thinking that the dialogue written for the characters was trying too hard and reaching a bit too far when it came to its satire. Some even flat out just called it dumb. I think overall, Moonbeam City does have more good to it than bad. I don't disagree that the series has its more stupid moments, but I feel there is a lot here that really can make up for that. I like the characters, I like the art style, and I see the plot lines we followed throughout the series to be at least interesting enough to want to watch. I totally would have wanted another season, see where else they could go and what else else they could do with this concept, but leaving it as a one-season series is still okay in the end. I had a fun time, and there was a surprising amount of other voice acting cameos or small bit parts that popped up in these 10 episodes. Like, you had your general voice actors like Cree Summer, Patrick Warburton, Carlos Alazraqui, and Tom Kenny. Yes, both original Spyro trilogy voice actors. Shout out to my boy Spyro. If you know, you know. And even Adam West. But you also had other actors like Allison Janney, Kate McKinnon, and more pop up. Overall, I think Moonbeam City is a surprisingly fun show that got a little too harshly reviewed. So give it a chance if you want. It's only 10 episodes long, so not much to lose if you decide to give it a shot.
You know Randy already smashing that potato.
Legends of Chamberlain Heights is quite an interesting show, to say the least. We are getting into a territory now where everything we are talking about here is from the past 10 years at the time of making this video, so they are a lot more fresh in my mind versus some of the older shows on this list. This show, for example, is one I vividly remember because of the art style. I don't know why, but it's like the look of the characters are burned into my brain or something. Maybe I need to see a doctor. Either way, Legends of Chamberlain Heights centers around a group of teens who play on their school's basketball team. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say play? I meant sit on the bench. Just like that premise as a whole, as this becomes something that doesn't really matter at all in the series. It's really just about these main three teens here, Grover, Milk, and Jamal, experiencing life in Chamberlain Heights and all of the wacky situations they find themselves in. The series was created by 5 people: Brad Abelson and Mike Clements, who are both co-creators of the series Good Vibes, which I talked about in my animated MTV video, Quinn Hawking and Josiah Johnson, who played basketball for UCLA, and Michael Starberry, who had written the 2013 film The Inevitable Defeat of Mr. and Pete. Now, ideas-wise, the concept truly comes from both Quinn and Josiah, who, when on the basketball team for UCLA, found themselves sitting on the sidelines and just having conversations about other things not pertaining to the game at all, which you can see that heavily reflected in the series with how our 3 main characters sit on the benches, talk about other things that interest them, and we go along with them on their adventures. Josiah and Quinn ended up voicing the main characters, with Josiah voicing both Grover and Milk, and Quinn voicing Jamal. You also get some other recognizable voices in here like Jay Farrow, Tiffany Haddish, and Jamie Kennedy, which I think is funny that Jamie Kennedy isn't voicing the character of Milk, since Jamie played B-Rad in Malibu's Most Wanted, but hey, that's just an observation. An entertainment observation. Thanks for watching. I hate myself. Why did I even write that? It's not even remotely funny. Anyway, I guess I can segue with that into talking about the humor of the show. A lot of the jokes and situations we see play out in the series do end up falling into the more shock humor genre that goes for some of the most absurd stuff out there. Like, I've seen a lot in my life, but Legends of Chamberlain Heights may just be up there for shows that truly shocked me with what was happening on my screen. And I don't know fully if that's a good thing or a bad thing, and I guess I'll just figure it out in therapy one day. Truly though, this show goes for some crazy absurdist stuff. Like, I don't even want to get into this whole Tupac thing that happened in the show, but I can certainly say I'll never forget it. Also, imagine being so absurdist to a point that something you made as a ridiculous joke in the show ends up becoming something that actually happens in real life. In November of 2016, the episode End of Days ends up having a joke about a helicopter crashing that inside had Kobe Bryant, which soon after ends up then exploding. And years later, at the start of 2020, yeah, right away, even with the show being over at that point, they ended up pulling down a clip of this moment in the show that they had posted to Twitter back when it had aired originally. Along with this, Comedy Central removed the episode from their website. Again, all of this happened after the show had already come to an end in 2017 after 2 seasons with 20 episodes in total. While there are some pretty good moments sprinkled throughout the show that I did find funny or just kind of wowed by for what they went for, I don't think Legends of Chamberlain Heights is a particularly great show, at least for me. I definitely didn't hate it. I don't think it's close to ever being the worst thing I've ever seen. It's just not for me at the end of the day. It kind of boils down to 2 main things, and that's the look of the show and the voices for some of the characters, especially when one of them is specifically a main character, and they sound like this.
Our first high school party? We gonna beat some cakes.
And hey, I don't blame anyone who ends up liking this show, or is probably just seeing random out of context clips that may in fact might boost getting people to be into the series. I doubt we will ever see a return for this series, but weirder things have happened. Anyways, I am curious as to your thoughts on this one. Let me know how you feel about Legends of Chamberlain Heights.
Well,
You're all fired. Wait!
Now we get to Jeff and Some Aliens, the series that spawned from the shorts of the same name inside of Comedy Central's TripTank. Here we get a chance to see what this concept could be like if it were to be expanded upon, and I think it does that in the right ways possible. Just like the shorts, the series, created by Sean Donnelly and Alessandro Manoli, follows Jeff, who is seen as the average human of Earth, giving the aliens who are visiting a chance to see if the average person offers enough understanding to prove their worthiness. There's Jeff, and there are some aliens. It makes enough sense to work here. Jeff here, voiced by Brett Gelman, is this average guy. Look at that, they nailed it. For real though, his character is pretty good for how he's fleshed out. He ends up being the best aspect of the show, which I am glad that for a show titled Jeff and Some Aliens, that Jeff is the best part. His life is pretty ordinary until some aliens end up being his roommates, putting him in some interesting situations mainly through the use of their alien gadgetry and technology. Every episode of the series follows the title scheme of Jeff and some blank, which I think is neat. Some of the best episodes in my opinion end up being the initial first episode to get used to the premise as we begin to understand who Jeff is and what his world around him is pretty much like, especially for the situation he gets into. And I also really liked Jeff and Some Love, because it really pushes the romantic side of Jeff's life to a literal do or die situation, and it's just pretty fun overall. There really is just a solid consistency here throughout the series that does make it feel like it should have had more people at least giving it a shot. I think the best overall episode though is Jeff and Some Laughs, which aside from being a fun enough premise for an episode, it will indeed give you at least some laughs. You know, I get why they called it that. That whole episode pokes fun at mid to late 2010 short viral internet videos like you'd see on YouTube or Vine, and what we see more of today in similar and new ways with TikTok, Shorts, and Reels, or Google Giggles. It's funny for the fact of how it's portrayed in the episode and why Jeff has to act so out of character in order to save his father's life. Even with some of the awkward and ridiculous situations Jeff gets into, what makes his character work best is that he isn't evil, he isn't bad, and the majority of the time he is just trying to do the right thing. His life in general isn't anything special, he's not living large, he struggles romantically, and he's just a guy. Usually things start off from a nice reason of Jeff being someone who wants to help out, and things quickly get pretty crazy thanks to the aliens' technology, which I think is pretty fair that the average person would end up causing all of the unforeseen problems that puts others or the whole world in danger through the use of alien technology. Sounds pretty believable to me, and plus it's just pretty funny in my opinion. More so for the fact that it comes from someone more innocent like Jeff, who has to be the one to clean things up. The aliens themselves are okay, they really don't offer much outside of their connection to Jeff and where those story elements go. So it's pretty funny that the weakest element of the show called Jeff and Some Aliens are the aliens themselves. The Jeff part, good. The aliens part, meh. It's really what comes of them being there and the gadgets that they have that make the show fun from their side of things most of all. I do think this show should have been given a better chance to shine from people checking it out, but after season 1 with 10 episodes, the series was ultimately canceled. I totally get feeling put off by a show like this. The art style isn't particularly calling you in to want to watch it. It definitely is more looking than it is pleasant on the eyes. I didn't personally find the look of the show to be a problem. It kind of works for the world of the show, but I don't think I'll ever call it particularly pretty. I do wish that we ended up getting a second season. I still think there was a lot of fun to be had here with the premise, and it seemed like there almost was a second season. Not long after the first season and now after a panel at WonderCon, fans of the series asked questions through a special Facebook page Q&A where they wanted to know about when a season 2 would be happening, with them replying that they didn't really know about a release date or anything, but they did say that they are working on the show. It wasn't until several months later at the end of 2017 where the show would be announced as officially canceled. So there might be full-on scripts for season 2 completed, and it sucks that we will most likely never see them. Either way, I still think you should check out Jeff and Some Aliens. Who knows, you might just love it. Or not.
What the heck was that?
To only learn how the election works after the election.
From here in the history of Comedy Central, there was nothing new animation-wise for a while. 2017 seemed to be it for trying anything new aside from anything to do with South Park and keep that going. And 3 years later, we would see our first bit of new animation on the network, but it's not what you think it is. Nor was it also even on the network yet. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, I'll explain. Tuning Out the News is a take on cultural political climates ranging from 2020 up until the end of 2023. But get this, it's all partially fully animated. That's why it's called Tooning Out the News. You see what they did there? T-O-O-N. Created mainly by Stephen Colbert of The Colbert Report and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, along with a list of other names like R.J. Fried, Chris Licht, Tim Luke, Zach Smilovitz, and Mike Leach. This was mainly born of something that was born out of another thing. Originally, you have The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, where he would start incorporating these animated interview segments, and as these evolved to become more political, this then got turned into the Showtime series Our Cartoon President, and that ran for like 3 years. So then in 2020, this cartoon style, mixed once again with live action people and backgrounds, would be turned into what Tooning Out the News would be. At first, they were more short form than anything and premiered on Paramount Plus, and eventually the series would grow in length and turn into what you'd consider a full-on show. The base concept would be an animated satirical parody on different news programs. So while real things would be talked about, it would really just be the canvas for these animated add-ons to be painted in, and you'd still get some crude jokes, gestures, and other stuff to give it a little more raunch than you'd get on a regular news program. Initially, it ran for 2 seasons on Paramount Plus, but for the 3rd season, it would end up making its way to Comedy Central as the network was in the process of building their adult animated program side of things back up. And things were going well for the show for a while, even getting that 3rd season a full-on expansion, with the format strictly being 22 minutes to fit a standard TV time slot. But with the show being put on hold at one point thanks to the labor dispute strikes for different aspects of production, the show was ultimately canceled. I am never for the loss of work when it comes to fighting for fair pay and fair working conditions, because it's awful you have to fight for it in the first place. As far as the program itself, to me, it was a big debate even including the show on the list, because while it is technically an animated program, it also partially isn't, and it's based on legit news rather than being something more fictional that relates back to the real world. I don't know, it's really hit or miss for me. I think there just is something that doesn't work about a program like this to connect with me, and I think that really boils down to what's the point here, because you could just watch the regular news and nearly get the same thing, just maybe with a little less sass and obvious disguised jabs. I mean, at this point, I'd rather watch the actual news than watch this version of it where the animation looks like this. It looks like cheap caricatures, no, not even caricatures, just cheap versions of people who are animated like this. Like, my guy, what are you doing with your head? It also just looks like half-baked Archer, and I don't like that it makes me compare something like this to Archer, because I think Archer looks really good. Now, a lot of the added-in comedy writing keeps going into either low-hanging fruit comedy, where it just emphasizes the obvious. It's like putting up the cartoon version of me and making jokes like, oh, this reminds me of a show, one that may or may not be regular. Hilarious. On top of that, there's just a lot of toilet humor, and I just don't get the point. You already have so many political-based shows out there that, while not animated, talk about the news in a comedic and more satirical way that, for better or for worse, have come off way more creative. I don't know who this is for. What audience would want to go from South Park, who is probably already poking fun at the same things, to this, where it would be something South Park would probably make fun of? Now, South Park is not the baseline here, I'm just using it as an example, especially for this all being on Comedy Central. Again, at least for the last season being on there. Obviously, there isn't anything here that you need to go back and watch. It's all about current news from the time the episodes were coming out, at least for the most part. Nothing is really relevant about it. There's nothing new you haven't heard before, and with the sheer amount of weekly episodes that released, I do not need to go back and watch 250 plus episodes of this. I watched a bunch, got the gist, and it's only on the list for the fact that it met the criteria to be in this video, animated and on Comedy Central. So there you go. You don't need me to tell you that you don't need to go back and watch this. If you did see this as it was coming out and you care enough to have any input on it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you.
Are you close?
Not really. Maybe try turning over.
Fairview, a cartoon created by R.J. Fried and produced by everyone else, and more from Tuning Out the News. See, I guess there was more of a reason to talk about that other show. Fairview is honestly as forgettable as they come. It's a series that focuses on life in a small American town that deals with those in charge of the town and the citizens within it. Those in power are not qualified for their roles to play, and those living in the town deal with it and the way that the culture in America is constantly evolving. If you could think about any of the major cultural events that took place between 2020 and the start of 2022.
Stuff that happened in the
that one?
that
one's a good one. Oh yeah, that as well. They are the situations they face here. Everything that had happened is turned into basic jokes, or just being mentioned because it's funny to reference the things that happened without any effort behind the reasoning of mentioning it, right? Like, I can do that too. Watch. Whew, okay. It's been snowing a lot lately. That's it. That's the joke. Fairview premiered on February 9th, 2022, and look, I know that at this time the world was kind of in the middle of something, but why are we regressing with animation? I'm not critiquing the artistry specifically. I mean, this show looks like it was animated movements-wise for a web short that you'd see in the mid-2000s. As far as the way the characters look, the faces look like something made in a computer program generator rather than someone spending a lot of time making them. Aside from all of that, what drove the decision to make the characters look like little pieces from a board game, like the ones from the Game of Life or something, or having them look like an avatar that you'd create on a messaging program? I know that they're supposed to be like nesting dolls, but why? This aspect adds nothing to the show other than making it feel like they needed to make it as cheap and as quick as possible. I am all for shows and movies trying out new and unique art styles, but when you get those productions, you can usually tell that there was passion put into it and a vision behind it. You're telling me that any of this within the show feels like any bit of passion or vision was behind it? I don't want to dog on the show in this way. I'd rather just say it's not for me and move on, but going from the last show and having the same team behind it on this show just makes me feel the same as I did for the stuff I saw over there. There is nothing here for me to tell you why you'd even want to give this show a chance. It is only 8 episodes long and oh, sorry, I actually wrote my script wrong. I think I meant to say 8 episodes too long. Yeah, that sounds correct. I am dyslexic after all. Maybe I am harsher on something like this because of everything else that we have looked at today. Even if it turned out not for me, I could still see a level of care and creativity behind it. This show feels like the product of the pandemic to take a bunch of political and cultural issues and look at how silly and stupid these incompetent people in charge are, and how a small town is affected by it all. So a small town that is supposed to be filled with a bunch of interesting characters and where a bunch of wild stuff is supposed to take place, mainly based on satire of current topics and or politics. Wow, you know what? You just made worse South Park. There is no built-up attachment to growing these characters like we've had throughout South Park as a series. And if you want to compare the more simplistic art styles of both, these two are not even in the same division here. South Park may be simple, but it's stylized and crafted to be something unique that still can have so much expressiveness baked into it. And Fairview, yeah, their faces never change. They look like this and that's it, with only their mouths moving. And I'm sorry for constantly comparing things to South Park, but come on. Fairview doesn't have a point to bringing in the topics they want to parody or satirize. It really is just pulling from what's currently happening and blatantly putting it on display, pointing at it like, this is so true, guys, as if the series did something revolutionary. I understand why the show was heavily panned by both critics and those who gave it a chance. If you by any means found some bit of enjoyment from it, I support you. I think that's great, and I would like to know what those things were, because I clearly don't see them. This is some of, if not the least, amount of fun I've had so far working on this video and watching all these shows. Honestly, the worst offense of all is that everyone is yelling when they are just talking in this show. I constantly just had to keep turning this show down. It's very obnoxious. My ears hurt and I just want to sit in silence.
They're gonna get you, Jordan. They're gonna surround you. Those little nesting dolls are gonna surround you. They're gonna eat you, Jordan. You gotta be scared, Jordan.
The name's Doobie McBooberton.
Digman may just be the first step in the right direction here again for the type of animated series Comedy Central should be focusing on. Created by Andy Samberg and Neil Campbell, Digman is a series that takes from the stylings of Indiana Jones and National Treasure as we follow Rip Digman, an adventurous archaeologist who steps back into the world 12 years after losing his wife and having a chance to rebuild his reputation. And there's a lot more that plays into that, as well as how the world sees archaeologists, or as they say, archies, because it's all a pretty big deal here. So in the world, everyone knows about what happened to Rip and talks about him in a negative light, viewing him now as more of a loser and someone who has lost all their good-looking attributes, which comparatively we see in the flashback opening of the first episode to where things are now in the modern day of, well, 2023 when this first season came out. Now, I grew up loving stuff like Indiana Jones, and there definitely is a vibe of that here in this show, but more importantly, for the context of this show, I also grew up enjoying the National Treasure movies quite a bit. Yeah, they are goofy, the adventures could be a bit ridiculous, but God, what I wouldn't give to just have National Treasure 3 be a thing already. Please. Please. Please! National Treasure seems to really be the formula they use to mold the series from, having Rip lead the adventures with a Nicolas Cage voice impression that has enough room to be its own thing while also still giving you all the Nicolas Cage vibes that you may or it may not want, to each their own. Andy made note of this when speaking to Seth Meyers on his show to promote the series, and it comes off as more of a love letter to the goofiness and campiness feelings those films provided. You'll have the series pointing out all the stuff you may question when watching adventure films, like the implications of taking artifacts out of their native countries causing problems, problems for them, all for the sake of putting something in a museum. Also playing into the trope that the great adventurer is also a teacher who comes off boring during their day job. When Rip gets the chance to get back into the swing of things all these years later, as well as a chance to find a certain item where he could get the position as the head Archie who is tasked with getting items for a billionaire's new museum, he embarks on a worldwide adventure with one of the students in his class named Saltine. This becomes a problem when his rival Zane, who originally was his partner that betrayed him the day his wife died, is now also in the mix, taking away his chances of getting the job by stealing the item from him, even though Rip actually did find it. This still brings him a lot of excitement and gets him back into wanting to do more of this as jobs for him actually come in for getting just a crumb of credit for finding the original item in the first place. We do get some really interesting storylines that get built off of this as well, that lead into the bigger picture of the show, with this billionaire collecting these items and artifacts for other reasons entirely, and the fact that Rip has his wife currently frozen and preserved as he wants to find the Holy Grail, which he believes can actually bring her back to life. I think the initial first episode really does a good job at selling the show and what it will be like, giving you more of a story-driven narrative throughout the series with mysteries and more to learn about, as we still get all the adventurous action that comes from the genre we're placed in. The series premiered on March 22nd, 2023, and so far has lasted 8 episodes to make up the first season. Because of coming from the Lonely Island camp of comedy, the series has the comedy you'd expect coming from something Andy Samberg has done. If you enjoy his humor in shows like Brooklyn Nine-Nine or in the movie Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping, you're going to get more of that here. I do think there was a good blend of the sillier side of jokes that flow throughout the more raunchy cutaways or references, and I think a solid balance was struck. The series also fully has an uncensored version, with Comedy Central letting the writing fly with cursing you wouldn't usually hear or hear as frequently back in the day, so it feels like a lot more was able to be gotten away with here, and I don't feel that they ended up using it all for more shock value. I really don't feel that they went overboard here with anything, which helped it kind of feel more natural. I think what also really works in the show for me is the team around Rip, with Saltine being this very excited, bright-eyed fan of these adventures and wanting to be along for the ride as if she were a fan of movies like National Treasure. Her relationship with Rip is genuinely pretty sweet, giving so much hope for Rip to be who he once was and feel like someone believes in him, rather than just being beaten down by other people or the media. She ends up usually being the one to ground reality around Rip in these situations that they find themselves in. There's also Rip's plane pilot and friend Swooper, who, since being voiced by Tim Robinson, is just Tim Robinson. And that's not a bad thing at all. I guess that really depends on if you like the humor of his other shows, but I think he's a fun character. There's Fleety Aloris, who is the pet animal that comes along on the journey, and I like the overall dynamic that this entire group has. Some of the adventures we go on aren't as exciting or as interesting as some of the others, but I never found myself bored. If anything, 8 episodes isn't enough. I'm so tired that this is considered a season nowadays. As of now, the series is still expected to get its 2nd season, but it's now 2 years essentially since it premiered, with no news about when this is happening, and I do hope that we get more. I don't think it was a revolutionary show or anything like that, I just had a lot of fun with it. Maybe I liked it more because of some of the recent stuff I had to take a look at and watch, and that I'm happy for the fact that Comedy Central greenlit something new at least, but whatever the case may be, it's a small 8-episode series at the moment with a lot to like in my opinion. The art style is nice, I think the jokes mostly hit thanks to the people voicing them with their flair of comedy, and the adventures we go on are a solid enough time that I'd recommend spending your time watching them. It feels nice to get something like this that I ended up having a nice time with. Now we move on to our last animated series to talk about, and I heard this one slaps.
Why's my mom taking a bath with the mailman?
After Everybody Hates Chris ended in 2009, I don't think anyone thought that 15 years later in 2024 that the series would come back, and this time in animated form. Much like the original live-action series, Everybody Still Hates Chris follows a fictionalized version of Chris Rock's life growing up in Brooklyn in the 1980s. It was kind of cool to see this sort of sequel series happen. I was a fan of the original show, and when it was announced it would be coming back in animated form, I definitely was curious to see what they could do more with this premise. It's safe to say that there was a lot of care here for how this series picked things back up from the original series and continued it forward. There's a perfect connection here, all while giving the new show its own brand new identity and allowing it to play into the fact that it is animated. Everybody Still Hates Chris ends up being an immediate continuation of the original show. The final episode for Everybody Hates Chris ended with a bit of a Sopranos parody to cut to black before revealing the answer of if Chris had passed getting his GED, letting this new series start off where the answer is revealed, and that is he failed. child, with his mom saying he's going to slap him so hard, it's basically going to turn him into animation, transitioning the show right there into the 2D world. Not that I think you needed an explanation or a continuation like that to keep a new series going, but this was really good, especially for keeping it in context of how the characters are portrayed in a way to keep it feeling like it truly is part of the original series. Everything is also pretty much the same here, aside from Chris, his brother Drew, his sister Tanya, and his best friend Greg having new voices step in for their actors, since, well, you know, they all grew up in real life. Chris's father and mother in the show, played by Terry Crews and Tashina Arnold, do return to voice themselves, which really makes the show feel perfectly connected in my opinion. I mean, imagine Julius here not being Terry Crews or Rochelle not being Tashina Arnold. It just doesn't feel right, because they really added so much to the original show. In fact, the show basically hinged on the fact of these two returning, with all the creatives here seemingly willing to pass on doing the series if they weren't involved. Also, Chris Rock himself does return as the narrator, so it never loses any aspect that would alienate the show away from being Chris's vision for this fictional version of his life. Comedy Central ended up being the ones to pick up the series for 20 episodes split between 2 seasons. The first season would premiere on September 25th, 2024, running for 10 episodes while we now await any sort of update or announcement for the second season. But when looking at this series, it really has to work, right? There needs to be a reason of why they felt the show should have come back, and what the medium of animation could bring to the table. I don't think there truly needs to always be some sort of big justification or big moment where it all makes sense as to why it was worth it for the series to come back, or in this example, coming back in a slightly different way. In all 10 episodes so far, there is not one episode that will make you feel like it wasn't just built around telling more stories. I think they just wanted to tell more stories. The episodes feel like any episode you'd find in the original series. You could easily slot them in anywhere, or have them done in live action, and they would feel right at home. I think in this specific case, it's finding a moment that provides a sense of identity that makes it feel completely like its own thing, that you don't necessarily have to have seen the original show to just get what's going on here. And the show does balance a good job at not trying to make it feel like things are starting over, and that we have to get reintroduced to all of the characters, while still offering some basic enough introductions that someone could just watch this and start understanding all of the characters, who they are, their dynamics with one another, all of that, just from starting with this. Everyone keeps their same personalities and characteristics from the original series. There is no real dramatic change here pretty much across the board. Maybe a few small tweaks to fit the cartoon better when it comes to some side characters, but nothing that truly breaks who anyone in the family was. I also feel that for the most part, the plots of each episode were pretty fun, and the initial first episode I think really does a great job at keeping you invested based on how it deals with Chris failing his GED and having to do the 10th grade over again, and what the actual truth of the matter is and how it is resolved by the end of it. Plus giving Chris a way to express all that he had gone through in the past, dealing with getting to school and everything, that was trying to keep him down so that his parents could see how hard he did try amongst how much he had to push through, was all really well done. The heart of Everybody Hates Chris was the family dynamic. At the end of the day, there is so much heart woven into how the parents, well, parent and the lessons that are learned. It feels like true life experiences. The cartoon doesn't forget that, keeping in these dynamics to still deliver a solid experience for the viewers, both for newcomers and returning ones from the OG show. One aspect that really carried over well from the original show was something that just lends itself to the medium of animation, that being the cutaway or exaggerated daydream-like gags that the show would randomly have. It had that cartoony feel in the live-action show, and it just makes sense here in a cartoon. So if honestly there ever was a reason why they all wanted to continue the show and do so in this medium, this would be the thing I totally would understand as the thing they would pitch it for. It literally makes perfect sense. I love the look of the show as well. I think it captured a lot of the original show greatly. I only think a few character designs were changed up a bit, but it's really only the side characters within the world of the show that feel altered, both in look and personality somewhat. Greg specifically as a friend does feel a bit different. I don't know if I'd say in a bad way, but he feels more antagonistic than anything, and I feel it makes his and Chris's friendship suffer a bit in the show. As for the quality of the animation, it looks great and gives the characters some very fluid movement and plenty of details in their facial expressions where I could feel there was a real passion behind nailing down a solid mix of adapting a live action show and letting a cartoon be a cartoon. There just seems, at least to me, that there was a lot of love that went into making the show return and continue on in new ways. This doesn't feel like it came back because they wanted to try rebooting something for the sake of it, and now I feel that there could be a lengthy future for the show to keep telling more stories. I am here for more of this series. If you enjoyed the original show, I think it's pretty safe to say that you will also enjoy this show as well. It's rare that reboots or continuations that are definitely pulling from the nostalgia heartstrings here end up actually working, but I think this show is a good example of how it's done right and in a unique way. Another example would be the show Cobra Kai continuing the original Karate Kid animated movies. And I don't care what you say, yeah, it can be cheesy, but oh my god, was it some of the most fun I've ever had with a series ever. Okay, please don't get me distracted with Cobra Kai. You're a bad influence on me. I would literally talk about it for hours. Also, I guess I have been talking for hours already, haven't I?
Raise your hands in the air.
If anything, Comedy Central had a lot of ups and downs when it came to their animated side of things throughout their existence. A lot of their early programs paved the way for what adult animated series could actually do and get away with on TV. They even took a chance on a cartoon like South Park only for it to become their longest running animated series. Like, it's been running longer than SpongeBob SquarePants has, and SpongeBob just recently passed Arthur as the longest running kids program. That's crazy. And I know there's just people ready to comment being all like, well, The Simpsons has been running even longer than that. And that's great. But also not the point of what I'm talking about. But thank you, here's a gold star. You did great, champ. I'm saying that it's not every day you take a chance on something and it becomes the biggest and longest lasting thing that carries the brand and also becomes an icon for pushing censorship boundaries and so much more. There are some really great and unique series here that we've covered today. A lot of chances were taken. Many shows had more time than others to shine. Some shows were even saved and continued on because of the network. And oh, so many of these shows have big places in my memories for me growing up and watching them. Some better than others. Remembering the Futurama seasons? Oh, that's a nice one. It warms my heart. Remembering everything I did about Drawn Together? Well, that may have scarred me for life. Who's to know? I am a YouTuber talking about media throughout the years, so maybe that's your answer. There's a lot of fun animated series to explore from Comedy Central's history as a network, and I implore you to seek out some of the ones you haven't seen or maybe haven't seen in a very long time. You may find some good stuff that you end up surprisingly liking, or maybe you just need a good trip down nostalgia lane and want to re-experience some of these programs. While I do think there was a bit of a time where Comedy Central stopped focusing so much on their animated properties, not taking risks or even possibly greenlighting not so great ideas, I do think that where they are heading is in the right direction for the future of animation on their network. In 2025, we will be seeing Beavis and Butthead make their way to the network. That reboot / continuation of the series has been on Paramount Plus, but now will have its third season come straight to TV through Comedy Central, which is cool to see the series back on the air in this way. While I am sure we will get more updates and announcements of future programs beyond this, we currently know of 2 other series that are coming to Comedy Central at some point. Not sure if it's this year, next year, or even further out, but these 2 programs are both interesting for their own reasons. First, there is Golden Axe, which will be an animated comedic series take on the classic video game series from Sega. Nothing much is known about the series aside from it coming from the creator of Solar Opposites and Star Trek Lower Decks, Mike McMahon, and Adult Swim producer Joe Chandler. There are also a few character roles in the series we know along with the actors attached to voice them, but since this was announced in April of 2024, we haven't heard any updates at the time of making this video. And this one is interesting because it is an adaptation of a video game series, and while the track record for video game-based series or movies has definitely gotten better over the years, who really knows how this one will go? I guess if you watched either Solar Opposites or Star Trek Lower Decks, you can kind of expect the type of show it will be and the style of humor within it, so take that as you will. The other series that is set to come sometime in the near future is another reboot of a nostalgic property, that being Ren and Stimpy. And oh boy, am I worried about this one just a little bit. One of my earliest videos on the channel was me talking about the last time Ren and Stimpy went towards an adult audience after the original show with Ren and Stimpy Adult Party Cartoon, and I am very vocal in thinking that it genuinely is an awful show. While the original Nickelodeon version of the show definitely was full of moments that could skew more out there and have jokes catered to an older audience, it didn't just try to be offensive, shocking, vulgar, and messed up like Adult Party Cartoon was. Did it try and push some boundaries? Yeah. But was the show enjoyable on its own merits? Also yes. Now, for this new version of the show, it was announced back in August of 2020 that Comedy Central is working on a reimagining of the original series, and they want to play into the ways that the original series did push boundaries, just hopefully not in the way of that other version. It was claimed at the time that the original show creator John Kay will not be involved nor receive any money from the series for namesake due to the awful misconduct he was accused of in 2018, to which he blamed on being bipolar and having ADHD. As of right now, there have been no updates on the status of the show, how far along it is in development, and when we should expect it. We had small little crumbs here and there, like the fact that Billy West is involved and is going to be voicing both of the main title characters once again, which is pretty cool, and that the animation studio Snipple Animation will be the ones, or I guess have been the ones, working on the animation in the show. There was a tad bit of controversy after the announcement that involved a major petition against the series from going forward with over 11,000 signatures. This ties back to the whole John K thing, with Robin Bird being the one behind this petition. She worked as an intern for Spumco Inc., which was John's animation studio, and was one of the two main people who spoke up about him and what they had been through. One of her statements included with this petition was, "The difference between a reboot and watching old episodes is a big one. We can't erase Ren and Stimpy, but we don't have to popularize it all over again and bring new attention to its creator. I don't care if people want to watch the old shows, but a new one isn't an appropriate way to spend young artists' time. I think young people, marginalized voices especially, should be who the execs are listening to." Now, since this, she has been working at the studio Awesome Inc., who are the ones behind the production of the Ren and Stimpy reboot. So I guess for now, we are just still waiting to see what materializes from this Ren and Stimpy reboot. Unless we're talking about those leaks that happened. So at the end of 2023, we started getting random bits of leaks regarding stuff like the names of episodes and title cards, with 2024 ending up surprising the internet for a bit with leaks that contained the entirety of 2 episodes, as they were dropped online, where now they are definitely hard to find and see in their entirety if you're looking for them. But things didn't stop there. The show seemed like it was ready to go as other countries were gearing up for their premieres based on when the US was going to officially launch the series. I do find this odd based on the massive lack of promotion if they were this close to launching in different markets around the world, but weirder things have happened, I guess. And speaking of weird, France would end up actually premiering some episodes in July of 2024, and the cherry on top of that was later in that same month, every episode made their way online as part of a larger leak. And since then, aside from it being hard to seek out the episodes, we've heard nothing about the reboot. No update, no discussion, nothing. There are some clips floating around here and there from the episodes, but as of now, the series is still very hush-hush on whatever is going on, and whatever the future plans actually are. Until then, or until anything is official, the Ren and Stimpy show reboot is definitely a thing still to come, or possibly came but not officially, so stay tuned if you're interested. I honestly don't have a clue anymore at this point. The story of what's happening and what has happened for sure make it an interesting topic of discussion regardless. For now anyways, I do want to hear from you. Now that we've looked at every animated series from Comedy Central, I want to know all of your thoughts. What shows bring you the most memories or nostalgia? Which ones do you think are worth a shot that many people didn't give? And which ones truly didn't work for you and you ended up not enjoying? I am personally optimistic for the future of animation on Comedy Central. I hope we see more announcements of other future projects, and in saying that, I hope we see them then actually come to fruition. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like on this video and to subscribe for more videos coming soon, but until then, later.
The citizens of Fairview are coming to eat you, Jordan.